Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts project at thunderbolts.info. On this series, we are presenting what we consider the 10 most compelling and clear-cut reasons why electromagnetism is the force that rules the cosmos. This exercise provides an invaluable opportunity to juxtapose the theoretical predictions and explanations of standard cosmology versus those of the electric universe. In our first two episodes, we explored the significance of pervasive, vast cosmic magnetic fields and filamentary cosmic structures, respectively, neither of which are predicted or explained by gravity-centric cosmology, but they are expected features of an electric universe. In fact, at all scales throughout the cosmos, both the structures and energies of the most stupendous phenomena reveal an underlying cause that continues to elude space scientists. Today, we explore why spectacular emissions across unimaginable cosmic distances are the third of 10 reasons why the universe is electric. Cosmic jets. It is a mystery that space science must openly confront. What force is capable of producing high-energy jets spanning not millions of miles, but many light years across the cosmos? What confines the jets to narrow streams across cosmic distances? And what prevents the so-called streams of gas from dispersing in the, quote, vacuum of space? These questions are posed by the discovery of Herbig-Haro objects, or jetted stars, which have sometimes been characterized as, quote, cosmic tornadoes. The image on your screen appeared as the astronomy picture of the day in 2006. The stellar jet of Herbig-Haro 4950 was detected at the incredible velocity of 100 kilometers per second. The caption of the APOD, entitled Cosmic Tornado, reads as follows. Though such energetic outflows are well known to be associated with the formation of young stars, the exact cause of the spiraling structures apparent in this case is still mysterious. Of course, terms like tornado and outflow are derived from the familiar behaviors of wind and water on our own rocky planet. But how could such terminology be applicable to the behaviors of, quote, gases in a vacuum? The inappropriateness of the analogy is highlighted in the scientific paper, The Formation of Stars and Solar Systems. It states, stellar jets are analogous to giant lawn sprinklers. Whether a sprinkler whirls, pulses, or oscillates, it offers insights into how its tiny mechanism works. Likewise, stellar jets, billions or trillions of miles long, offer some clues as to what's happening close into the star, at scales of only millions of miles. Material either at or near the star is heated and blasted into space, where it travels for billions of miles before colliding with interstellar material. This explanation raises more than one fatal objection. It begs the question, if one were to turn on a, quote, lawn sprinkler in space, what would happen to the stream of water? The aforementioned paper acknowledges the problem by asking the following question. Why are jets so narrow? The Hubble pictures increase the mystery as to how jets are confined into a thin beam. Of course, heat alone does not explain the ejection and confinement of the jetted material. Discussing the jet of Herbig-Haro 111, the aforementioned paper admits that a disk around the star, which is supposed to provide the, quote, nozzle from which the theoretical lawn sprinkler emanates, is not evident in this image. The authors then entertain a rarely considered possibility. They state, one theoretical possibility is that magnetic fields in the disk might focus the gas into narrow beams, but there is as yet no direct observational evidence that magnetic fields are important. We note that this statement was published more than a decade ago, and as we outlined in the first episode of this series.
Hey, if you guys, anybody watching, if you know anybody who really thinks that they know that the Thunderbolts project or the EU theory is totally incorrect, please bring them in here so we could teach them a little something today. Thank you.
Even in the last 10 years, space scientists have had no choice but to much more freely acknowledge the pervasive, vast cosmic magnetic fields. A dramatic recent example of this is the magnetic field scientists have detected associated with the Magellanic Bridge, a thread-like filament stretching an astounding 75,000 light-years and connecting the small and large Magellanic Clouds. One of the researchers said of the finding, not only are entire galaxies magnetic, but the faint, delicate threads joining galaxies are magnetic too. Everywhere we look in the sky, we find magnetism. Jane Kaczmarek of the University of Sydney said of the finding, in general, we don't know how such vast magnetic fields are generated, nor how these large-scale magnetic fields affect galaxy formation and evolution. Just as electric currents sustain and confine the vast filament connecting the small and large Magellanic Clouds, it is electric currents flowing through plasma that produce the extraordinary structure and energies of the Herbig-Haro jets. An ongoing astronomical mystery is both the beaded structure and, quote, kinkiness of stellar jets. Of course, as plasma physicists will attest, beading and kink instabilities are two of the most easily recognized features of electrical discharges in plasma. In fact, as we turn our attention to an even greater scale, to the spectacular cosmic jets seen emanating from galaxies, we see the perhaps inevitable confirmation of the jet's electrical nature. In 2011, a team of scientists, including radio astronomer Philip Kronberg, measured the electrical current in the jet shooting from the galaxy 3C303. The New Scientist headline, Universe's Highest Electric Current Found, states of the finding, a cosmic jet 2 billion light-years away is carrying the highest electric current ever seen, 10 to the 18th power amps, equivalent to 1 trillion bolts of lightning. Philip Kronberg of the University of Toronto in Canada and colleagues measured the alignment of radio waves around a galaxy called 3C303, which has a giant jet of matter shooting from its core. They saw a sudden change in the wave's alignment coinciding with the jet. This is an unambiguous signature of a current. Unfortunately, the team of scientists can only conclude that a black hole produces magnetic fields which then generate the current. But more recently, the study of cosmic jets at the vastest scale has provided findings that can only be described as fatal for this theory. In 2016, astronomers reported a finding that will never be reconciled with conventional black hole theory. A Royal Astronomical Society press release states of the finding, supermassive black holes in a region of the distant universe are all spitting out radio jets in the same direction. A lead investigator, Professor Ramil Dave, writes, this is not obviously expected based on our current understanding of cosmology. It's a bizarre finding. As noted by Professor Andrew Russ Taylor, these black holes don't know about each other or have any way of exchanging information or influencing each other directly over such vast scales. In the electric universe, it is not black holes at the centers of galaxies which are responsible for the observed energies and mass. Rather, the plasma discharge phenomenon called a Z-pinch creates plasmoids at the cores of galaxies. As the plasmoid's charge density increases, it creates the well-known plasma feature called a double layer, which can explode or release energy in the form of cosmic jets and other spectacular emissions. As we explained in the previous episode, plasma scientists have provided persuasive experimental proof for the dominant role of electromagnetism in influencing the structure and rotation of galaxies. In the electric universe, space across the vastest cosmic distances has a substructure of electrical potential, typically extremely subtle at any point, but sufficient to affect cosmic directionality. Both stars and galaxies occur like pearls on a string, revealing a filamentary or even cellular structure to the universe at unfathomable scales. Plasma physicists have demonstrated experimentally that plasma discharges can be scaled up to 14 orders of magnitude. In fact, the Nobel Prize winner, the father of plasma cosmology, Hannes Alfvén, proposed that plasma can be scaled up to an incredible 28 orders of magnitude. As we will continue to demonstrate in our following episode, standard astrophysics will never successfully explain the most stupendous electromagnetic events in the cosmos through theoretical models in which electricity doesn't cause anything. The breathtaking form and energies of cosmic jets are yet another of countless reminders that we live in an electric universe. For continuous updates on space news from the electric universe, stay tuned to thunderbolts.info. Welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info. In the first of this two-part episode, our guest Ben Davidson, the founder of suspiciousobservers.org and the Mobile Observatory Project, began explaining why the electromagnetic Sun-Earth connection may be the key to a new understanding of natural disasters on Earth. For several years, Ben and a community of colleagues have gathered a library of data on space weather and evidence for its connection to earthquakes, changes in climate, major storms, and other effects. This growing body of evidence suggests it is not a coincidence that the recent catastrophes in September of 2017, including the 8.1 magnitude earthquake off the southern coast of Mexico, and the devastating hurricanes Irma and other storms, occurred simultaneous with major solar activity. In fact, on September 6th of this year, the sun released its largest solar flare in 12 years. Today, Ben elaborates the significance of the space weather connection to earthly catastrophes, particularly earthquakes, and why such events may indeed be predictable.
Our peer-reviewed papers back from 2015 were mostly on earthquakes. And this is where things have been interesting because we had been in about an 8-month earthquake drought at high magnitude, one of the most significant on record. During a period of about 8 months, when statistically speaking, we should have had somewhere, between 10 to 15 magnitude 7 or higher earthquakes. We had one. But that silence was abruptly ended here on September 8th when a magnitude 8.1 earthquake struck the subduction zone of Mexico, actually moved it about 30 feet, created small tsunamis, but the real damage was on land where it created a lot of infrastructure problems, collapsed a lot of homes, and there were a number of dozen people who lost their lives. Now, this marked the largest earthquake to occur in more than a century in Mexico. But in another record, it was the largest earthquake to occur in the just shy of 1 year that our earthquake forecasting model has been running. It started on October 15th, 2016, as it currently stands. And we are almost ready to wrap up our first year and go back and do the analysis. This 8.1 was the strongest and largest magnitude earthquake of these, virtually 11 months since we began forecasting. And it was indeed part of the red alert, the high alert zones. People have different names they like to call them. I want to make sure I include all of them if they're listening. Sometimes we use alert stars, but we have this system of identifying about the 10 to 15% of the world's active faults that are most at risk at any given time. And we further restrict it to about 10 to 15% of the Ring of Fire. Because if you wanted to sort of cheat, you could use that 10 to 15% of global faults and cover about 25 to 30% of the Ring of Fire. We don't think that would be fair. And so those are the two restrictions, and those are pretty much the only two restrictions. And when it comes to earthquakes, we look to the most recent alert that was posted. We update this just about every day, usually multiple times per day, and you'll find these on Twitter or at Quake Watch, or we have links to them all over, really. But the essence of what it is it is a map of the globe, and there are tiny little alert zones posted very, very prominently and clearly in bright colors. It's very clear where the red alerts are. While magnitude 6 earthquakes have not been nearly as successful in terms of being able to be forecasted as we would have liked, we have been able to forecast 75% of the magnitude 7 or higher earthquakes using only that 10 to 15% of the active fault zones in the Ring of Fire. And that includes, as I said, the largest earthquake, which was a magnitude 8.1 in Mexico. One of the things that we look for are these sharp upticks. You know, on a week in, week out basis, we're actually looking at another solar phenomenon called a coronal hole. It's these large, they appear dark in the Solar Dynamics Observatory images. They really are dark holes in the solar atmosphere, but they only appear that way because of a lack of charged particles that are there to be picked up by certain ion detectors and certain different wavelengths of light detectors. The reason there's no particles in the atmosphere there is that's where the magnetic fields of our star are not looping from surface point to surface point, but in what they call open flux, which isn't really a good term. They're not really open because it really is kind of a closed system, and there's a plasma transfer back and forth from the sun to the planets through that magnetic connection. But you know, that is what we normally use because, you know, that doesn't have to deal with Earth's magnetic field, called the magnetosphere, and it has proved basically for years now to be one of the most reliable ways to tell when a big earthquake is going to occur. But the other way to tell is when the sun has one of these very, very rare super fast upticks from quiet, you could say. And we were really utterly quiet. We had so many days without any sunspots at all, to all of a sudden we have one of the strongest solar flares on record, followed about 24 to 48 hours later by what was probably a much bigger one that we just didn't have direct visibility of. And here we have this titanic earthquake and this titanic hurricane uptick at the same time. Well, you could say that, okay, well, that's an interesting coincidence. Let's see if it happens again. Well, I heard that exact same thing when I presented this back in 2015. And it was a response to, look, this is what happened in the past as well. And so perhaps those questions will keep being asked in the mainstream, which is where most of the important questions and the important news comes from.
I see no entry wound. I see no exit wound. I don't know how to treat.
And you know, trying to do research like this. But the information is out there. It is easy to see it for yourself. It's really as simple as just watching the sun. And when it comes to the earthquake forecasting, watching the global electric circuit as well, which, to be honest, is as simple as just looking for high pressure, low pressure, water vapor, and thunderstorms, something that we have good data for all over the world. So the models have really, again, as I said, come together in a very bittersweet way. We indeed forecasted a magnitude 8.1 earthquake, and I guess that is that's the sort of poison of forecasting natural disasters. Either you fail or it's terrible news and you succeed.
For continuous updates on space news from the electric universe, stay tuned to Thunderbolts.com.
Very careful not to show their eyes on the film. Weird.
Welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info. In early September of 2017, dramatic weather and seismic events reminded human beings around the world of the awesome power of nature. On September 7th, an 8.1 earthquake struck off of the Pacific coast, the largest quake in Mexico in a century. Just one day previous, Hurricane Irma, a tremendously powerful storm that originated near the Cape Verde Islands, reached its peak intensity with winds of 185 miles per hour. The hurricanes Katia and Jose followed on Irma's heels. And less than 2 weeks after the Mexico quake, a second tremor, this one 7.1 magnitude, struck the region. Only 2 days after the second Mexico quake, additional significant earthquakes occurred at the Pacific island of Vanuatu and just off the northeast coast of Japan, respectively. Are such clusters of natural disasters on our planet merely a coincidence? The key to answering the question is an understanding of the dynamic electromagnetic relationship between the Earth and the Sun, Increasingly mainstream scientific research has shown a dramatic connection, completely unexpected in standard reasoning, between intense solar activity and atmospheric and weather events on Earth. For instance, in 2014, we reported on a scientific study which showed intense and sustained increased lightning on Earth following solar storms. Is it then a coincidence that in early September, the sun erupted with its largest solar flare in 12 years? For the past several years,
let's see here. Oops. The first thing that popped out at me while I was looking at this was, for some reason, this cameraman is very good at avoiding the eyes of these people he zooms in on. I don't know why. It's kind of weird. That's anybody who's ever seen anybody die knows what the eyes look like. They look different than when the person's alive. So it's kind of important to hide the eyes. If you're trying to do a fake, you know, I'm just saying, it's just possible because of that. And if you were to fake it, you would be doing that. So, I mean, it's just unfortunate if this is real and they also hid the eyes. That just doesn't make any sense. So let's just take a peek at what it is I'm talking about. Hopefully this doesn't cause us any troubles here.
Are you good, brother? Are you good?
We don't know.
We don't know. Are you with me? He's breathing with me. I see him breathing with me. I see no entry wound. I see no exit wound. I don't know how to treat. Me either. I see no entry.
He just got there and he's saying, I see no exit, no exit wound. Like, right? He just got there. Just hasn't even lifted up the shirt yet before he started saying it. It seems sort of choreographed. I don't know. I just don't know.
Wait, look his face. Hey, I see no entry and no exit. Wait, look.
And then here's where it gets funny.
This gentleman shot.
There's their eyes, which are blinking.
Are you with? Hello.
I'm not saying dead people don't blink, but they're not blue. They're not fogged over. All right, they fog over. Your eyes go fog over. They look grayish, bluish, grayish when you die. Not still black and clean and clear. And it happens the second you die. It just happens like you can see it happening when the person dies. That's the thing. So
are you with?
There you have a clear reflection on the eye. So he cuts away the eyes. Look, now he's just down here while he's doing all this.
Holy shit.
I'm not saying it's fake, but I'm not saying it is real either because you can fake it. Here, it's not as if it's, just one thing. Here's another one. Let's cut out the eyes. You see, he was on the eyes, and he cut out the eyes. See, now he's doing it again, cutting out the eyes from this angle and that angle. See? Why?
Hey, where are you hit? Where are you hit?
He's in the head.
Head?
He's in the head, but he's still breathing.
Where from? Where's the head wound?
Exit right here. An entry and an exit. I don't know. Right here.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
She's gone.
Where are you hit? Where are you hit? She's hit. I'm trying to find nurses. I know nurses. I'm trying to find nurses. I'm trying. She's got a pulse. Hey! EMTs! Any EMTs? EMT, come here. Come here. Right here. Get over here. Right here. Right here. Female. Under the female. She's breathing. She's breathing. She's got a pulse. She's breathing. Anyone here hit needs an EMT? You're good? Give me a second. EMT! Anyone EMT? EMT!
Right here.
EMT? Anyone EMT? Where?
Covering the goddamn camera with his finger.
Come on.
I pull out the camera. You're gonna stick your finger over it.
Right here. You got one. She's breathing. Oh my God. Hey. Any EMTs? Where are the EMTs? Why are the lights off?
What do you mean, why are the lights off?
They've turned the lights off. Where are the EMTs? Why are
We
the
can
lights
see
off?
it's fake with the lights on.
To secure the area. Shooting's already stopped. Shooting was
No reason to turn the lights off.
what was going on during the shooting. Now we need lights to assess victims and assign EMTs.
Okay, everybody right now that's here on ground is deceased.
No, they're not. I got EMTs working on the guy here.
Yeah, but the choreograph was we were supposed to say they were deceased. Damn it! Oh, correct me. I don't know, Tim. It's hard to say those are real. Oh, thanks, man. It's weird, man. People who are telling you that this is definitely real and we definitely need gun control, they're not getting their YouTube channels taken down for playing it. Guaranteed. I'm just saying, if you weren't faking it, you'd have showed the eyes. Plus, I did see her eye go winkle, winkle, all reactive and shit. So, on that dead girl, before she started gurgling more blood. I don't know, man. They're just running bullshit on us again. I could almost guarantee it with that, with what I saw. I agree. Stinks of that same stench.
Thunderbolts colleague Ben Davidson, the founder of Suspicious Observers, has produced
Don't really care about Ben Davidson much. He's jumping on the back of somebody else's theory.
Welcome to Space News
no
from the
offense.
Electric Universe,
Ben.
brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info. Scientists with NASA's Juno mission to the gas giant Jupiter are again reporting findings that completely upend standard scientific theory. A team of investigators studying the Jovian aurora have made the shocking discovery of a seemingly inexplicable electron acceleration process that appears to cause Jupiter's brightest auroras. A JPL press release on the discovery states that investigators, quote, observed signatures of powerful electric potentials aligned with Jupiter's magnetic field that accelerate electrons toward the Jovian atmosphere at energies up to 400,000 electron volts. But what is most puzzling investigators is what they call a, quote, unstable acceleration process that appears to take over when the auroras become more powerful. The lead investigator says of the findings, at Jupiter, the brightest auroras are caused by some kind of turbulent acceleration process that we do not understand very well. There are hints in our latest data indicating that as the power density of the auroral generation becomes stronger and stronger, the process becomes unstable, and a new acceleration process takes over. When it comes to the instabilities in electrified plasmas, the investigators could perhaps benefit from consulting the published material of renowned plasma physicist Anthony Peratt, who wrote in his book, Physics of the Plasma Universe. Electrons in cosmic plasmas are readily accelerated to high energies in the presence of even very small electric fields. In addition, the body of electron population which attracts electrons of less than runaway speed is eroded by the escape of electrons brought up to critical speed. If the electric field persists long enough, all the electrons will eventually run away in energy. The core concept that still eludes Juno investigators may be provided by Professor Donald Scott, who in recent years has developed his own original mathematical modeling of the structure of an electrical Birkeland current. The telltale signature of these currents impinging at the poles of a planet is counter-rotating cylinders in the planetary atmosphere. This counter-rotation is clearly seen at the North Pole of Saturn, in the earthly auroras. And critically, it is obvious at the North Pole of Jupiter, where one can see at least 15 counter-rotating cylinders. We asked Dr. Scott for his interpretation of the mysterious electron acceleration in the Jovian aurora.
When you think about it, Birkeland finally, many, many years after the poor man died, his work was absolutely substantiated by the probes that we sent up into the Earth's atmosphere, upper atmosphere. Birkeland was right that the Earth's auroras were indeed caused by electrical particles, charged particles coming from the sun. Everybody knows that now, but this idea of spiraling, the twisting of magnetic flux, ropes that twist like ropes. Question I should think that they would be asking themselves, and it apparently has never occurred to them to do that, is why is the twist? What causes the twist? Everything in the sky twists. I mean, galaxies rotate, planets rotate, the sun rotates, everything twists, moves, but nothing sits still. Nothing flows like water in a pipe, just straight. Everything is twisting. Everything is in a tornadic kind of movement. And why? I would submit, according to the model that I developed, that is the basic, fundamental property of a Birkeland current is this twisting, this counter-rotation. And that's where all of these motions come from. Apparently, they have observed electric fields out there. Mention of the word voltage, and we're talking about, and they actually put in here 400,000 electron volts, and they said electrons are accelerated in the Jovian atmosphere at energies up to 400,000 electron volts. Well, if it's an electron, that means it's gone through a voltage drop of 400,000 volts. That is a whale of a voltage. I remember being completely laughed at by certain astronomers who have attended our conferences in the past, and there's nothing, no voltage like that out there. I mean, where's the battery? Where'd you get a battery of 400,000 volts? Well, and now all of a sudden they see it. And now they're mystified. And had they listened to us and been more cooperative with us maybe years ago, more than just the 2 or 3 years since I published this model, but in years prior to that, and they would have maybe not been quite as surprised as they are. I mean, everybody should realize that the way you get charged particles, for example, a prime candidate, an electron, to accelerate is to put it in an electric field, to put it through a voltage drop. By definition, a voltage is a measure of the potential, the electrical potential energy a positive particle has at a certain point in space. So if you say the voltage at this point is 400,000 volts, That means it's just like a billiard ball or a bowling ball sitting on top of a 400,000-foot mountain. Okay, so now all of a sudden the bowling ball rolls down the mountain. By the time it gets to the bottom of the mountain and has fallen through that distance, man, is it moving. It converts its potential energy, which is voltage, into kinetic energy, which is 1/2 mv squared, 1/2 the mass times the velocity squared. So that even though it's velocity squared, that's still a pretty high velocity. So that's where they're getting these tremendous velocities from. And I think their problem is they don't know where the voltage comes from.
So cool.
I realize, and I think everybody who's interested in plasma cosmology realizes that strong, very, very strong cosmic currents come not from a battery. There is no 400,000 volt battery out there in space. What there is an induction process when a conductor, and for the word conductor, substitute plasma, because plasma is a very, very good conductor. When a column of plasma moves through a magnetic field, or a magnetic field moves across a plasma, it's like this relative motion between plasma and a magnetic field, you will induce a current. And given the magnificent size of these astronomical size of some of these magnetic fields and these plasma fields out there, yeah, there's a tremendous potential, and I use the word as a pun, tremendous potential. It's an induced current that gives electrons this tremendous acceleration. If we here in the electric universe are correct, then the entire cosmos, and specifically our solar system as being in the cosmos, is fed by electric currents, Birkeland currents, or at least force-free field-aligned currents, or some type of currents. We know they're out there. We know they're voluminous in their effect. If you think of an electrical resistor, that is a resistor in a piece of wire, if current goes through that resistor, there'll be a larger voltage at the front end of that resistor where the current enters the resistor, and it'll go out at a, you can say a minus sign, where the voltage will be less. So there'll be a voltage drop across that resistor. Okay, well, if you've gone with me that far, how about let's put in parallel, that is to say, connect the top of a capacitor to the plus side of the resistor, and the other side of the capacitor to the bottom end of the resistor. Now we have what's called a parallel combination of a resistor and a capacitor. That is a good starting point, I think, to think about an object, whether it be the sun or Earth or Jupiter or any other object that is under the influence of an electrical force, electrical currents that go through it. Let's not argue about the sun. We know the sun has those kinds of currents entering and leaving. And the same thing is true about Earth, because we know about the Birkeland current that comes into the North Pole of the Earth. So we know that happens. But if you think about the gizmo that's in the middle, whether it's the sun or the Earth or Jupiter or whatever, as a little parallel combination of a capacitor and a resistor, you can realize that as the current goes down through the resistor and makes that plus minus, plus at the top, let's say if current comes in at the top, plus at the top, minus at the bottom across that resistor, that same voltage is applied to the capacitor. Now, if you apply a voltage to a capacitor, that capacitor will charge up. It will have charge. And so can a body like Earth be charged? Yes, because it's within the current input that the Birkeland current puts in the North Pole. Actually, Birkeland currents carry currents both ways. There are these cylinders, and you can get current going down in the middle and up on the outside. Bodies can have charge. They do have charge, and they may have a net charge if it's hooked up, as I just described, with across a resistor through which a current is flowing. And there's a voltage drop across the resistor. There will be a voltage drop then across that capacitor, and that means the capacitor will have a net charge.
For continuous updates on space news from the electric universe, stay tuned to thunderbolts.info. Welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info. Welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info. Recent news headlines have pronounced that renowned physicist Stephen Hawking now claims there are no black holes. A closer examination of Hawking's recent paper reveals this is not the case. Rather, he proposes a revision of black hole theory, which dispels of the so-called event horizon, a boundary from which nothing, not even light, can escape. However, lost in the discussion are numerous foundational problems with black hole theory. Far from the spotlight of the science media, mathematician Stephen Crothers has challenged the underpinnings of black holes and general relativity. What does Stephen make of Hawking's proposed revision of black hole theory and the countless questions that popular media have yet to ask?
In a paper dated the 22nd of January 2014, bearing the title Information Preservation and Weather Forecasting for Black Holes, Stephen Hawking has not claimed that black holes don't exist. He has now proposed that the event horizons of alleged black holes do not exist and that only apparent horizons form when gravitational collapse of a body such as a star produces a black hole. He's proposed his black hole apparent horizon in an attempt to prove that there are no black hole firewalls. Hawking retains all other alleged properties of black holes and still invokes quantum theory to claim that black holes evaporate by means of Hawking radiation. With his newfangled notions, Hawking seeks to now redefine black holes. He says in his paper that the absence of event horizons means that there are no black holes. In the sense of regimes from which light can't escape to infinity, there are, however, apparent horizons which persist for a period of time. This suggests that black holes should be redefined as metastable bound states of the gravitational field. Note that Hawking alludes here to the existence of black hole escape velocity. It's routinely claimed on the one hand that black holes have an escape velocity and that this escape velocity is equal to or greater than the speed of light in vacuum. If you toss a ball into the air, does it escape from the Earth? No. Does it leave the surface of the Earth? Yes. It goes up and then comes back down. So escape velocity doesn't mean that matter can't leave, only that it can't escape if its launch speed is less than the escape speed. I'll read from the Collins Encyclopedia of the Universe published in 2001. Black hole, a massive object so dense that no light or any other radiation can escape from it. Its escape speed exceeds the speed of light. I'll now read from the Dictionary of Geophysics, Astrophysics and Astronomy published in 2001. Black hole, a region of space-time from which the escape velocity exceeds the velocity of light. So it's claimed that black holes have an escape velocity. However, on the other hand, it's also routinely claimed that black holes suck matter in so that matter can only go into a black hole and nothing can come out of it, including light. The black hole event horizon is said to be a one-way membrane, a boundary from which nothing can even leave. I'll read from Hawking's paper, or book rather, The Theory of Everything, The Origin and Fate of the Universe, published in 2002. I had already discussed with Roger Penrose the idea of defining a black hole as a set of events from which it is not possible to escape to a large distance. It means that the boundary of the black hole, the event horizon, is formed by rays of light that just fail to get away from the black hole. Instead, they stay forever hovering on the edge of the black hole. So it's routinely claimed that black holes both have and do not have an escape velocity at the same time, but that's impossible. It's also important to note that escape velocity is an implicit two-body relation. One body escapes from another body. There's no meaning to escape velocity in a model of the universe that contains only one mass, and such a model bears no relation to reality anyhow. But all alleged black holes are universes which contain only one mass. Despite this, proponents of black holes and big bangs allege untold numbers of black holes present in an expanding Big Bang universe. Now, there are 4 alleged types of black hole universe, and there are 3 alleged types of Big Bang universes. However, proponents of black holes and Big Bangs never specify what type of black hole in what type of Big Bang they allege. For instance, it's claimed that there is a black hole at Sagittarius A star. What type of black hole in what type of Big Bang universe pertains to Sagittarius A star? They never say. This is always the case. Hawking's latest paper really changes nothing, because each and every alleged type of black hole and each and every alleged type of Big Bang are different and independent universes that can't be blended in order to manufacture multiple black holes in some Big Bang universe. In his paper, Hawking refers to an asymptotically curved black hole universe, the so-called Schwarzschild-Eddy de Sitter universe. This universe is asymptotically Eddy de Sitter space-time. Hawking also mentions the Kerr black hole universe. Schwarzschild, Risen and Nordstrom, Kerr and Kerr-Newman black hole universes are all asymptotically flat universes.
Another failure of modern cosmology that Crothers claims to have proved is the mutually exclusive nature of black holes versus the Big Bang expanding universe. Astronomers and astrophysicists may claim, quote, discoveries of black holes without specifying the theoretical conditions required for the black holes to exist.
I'd like everybody to consider this. All alleged black hole universes are spatially infinite, are eternal, contain only one mass, are not expanding, and are either asymptotically flat or asymptotically curved. However, all alleged Big Bang universes are either spatially finite in one case or spatially infinite in two different cases, are of finite age, contain radiation and many masses, are expanding, and are not asymptotically anything. It's now quite evident that all alleged black hole universes contradict all alleged Big Bang universes, and so they can't coexist. They're mutually exclusive by their very definitions. In fact, no alleged black hole universe can be blended with any alleged Big Bang universe, with other black hole universes, or with itself. Similarly, no alleged Big Bang universe can be blended with any alleged black hole universe, with any other Big Bang universe, or with itself. This is easily reaffirmed by the principle of superposition. General relativity is a nonlinear theory. Consequently, in general relativity, the principle of superposition is invalid. For example, let X be some alleged black hole universe, and let Y be some alleged Big Bang universe. From the linear combination or superposition, X plus Y is not a universe, because the principle of superposition doesn't hold in general relativity. Moreover, X and Y pertain to entirely different sets of Einstein field equations, and so they have nothing whatsoever to do with one another. Presumably, Hawking has still retained his Big Bang dogma with his latest black holes. So he still has unspecified types of black holes all over the place inside some unspecified Big Bang expanding universe, notwithstanding that black hole universes and Big Bang universes can't be superposed. Superposition violates the mathematical structure of the general theory of relativity. Consequently, Hawking's latest paper is just as nonsensical as all his previous writings on black holes and Big Bangs.
The phrase science by press release describes the confident pronouncements that sometimes masquerade as definitive science discoveries. The likelihood of the general public being misled on complex issues increases in the absence of independent verification of scientists' claims.
The problem with modern physics, and particularly astrophysics and particle physics, is that experiments are conducted and they're one-off experiments. None of these experiments can be reproduced by anybody because no one has a spare few $1 billion to be able to spend on a project to replicate the experiments. In science, experiments are supposed to be able to be replicated by independent people so that the results of any reports on the experiments can be verified or refuted. This is not the case with experiments that cost billions of dollars. Science is supposed to proceed by experiments that are able to be reproduced by independent parties in different laboratories. Well, this is not happening anymore. So science now relies upon one experiment or two experiments from the very same party with the very same machine, and with no other scientists having access to that machine to be able to do any experiments with it. Consequently, we get a biased set of information, and this can't form the basis of any science at all, either experimental or theoretical. Mathematics and physics are not the same. mathematical manipulations don't necessarily correspond to anything physical. This needs to be determined by experiment, and we now have a situation where we can't do that. Despite what is being observed, things are assigned to them simply because of the way science now believes things. For instance, black holes are found everywhere now. They're at the centers of galaxies. They're floating around all over the place. They have different sizes. They're from micro size up to ultra supermassive size. But the fact remains that nobody has ever found a black hole. All alleged reports of black hole discoveries only pertain to things that they say are black holes because it's a belief system. So the problem is, with all of these experiments, nobody can verify anything and must rely upon what one party says. So all the money that's being spent on these experiments is not forwarding science at all, and is in fact limiting science to certain dogmatic views that one can't use any experimental data to confirm or deny.
For continuous updates on space news from the electric universe, stay tuned to thunderbolts.info.
I just never know what people are talking about in this chat.
Brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info. Solar physicists around the world today are wondering, has the sun fallen silent? In 2013, the sun began its peak phase of an 11-year sunspot cycle called the solar maximum, when sunspot production should be at its highest. However, the sun's relative lack of sunspot activity has left some solar physicists openly startled. In a recent BBC report, Professor Richard Harrison stated, "I've been a solar physicist for 30 years. I've never seen anything quite like this. If you want to go back to see when the sun was this inactive in terms of the minimum we've just..."
Remember who's saying it, because that's what's important. These knuckleheads that are like, oh, mainstream scientists don't agree. But these are your mainstream scientists that we're pulling these quotes from, for which we've pulled these quotes, from where we pulled these quotes. I just hate how dumb American English sounds. Trying to unroll from it feels
just
dumb.
Had, and the peak we have now. You've got to go back about 100 years. One reason some scientists find this so in terms of the report, Professor Richard Harrison stated, "I've been a solar physicist for 30 years. I've never seen anything quite like this. If you want to go back to see when the sun was this inactive in terms of the minimum we've just had and the peak we have now, you've got to go back about 100 years. One reason some scientists find this so startling is the apparent historical connection between similar lulls in solar activity and freezing cold weather on Earth. But the most important question science can now ask is, why is the sun behaving this way?"
Folks have been talking very recently about the possibility of the sun, quote, falling asleep, unquote. What is the electric universe view of the sun falling asleep? There seems to be somewhat of a lack of sunspots. You know, we hear the phrase active sun and quiet sun. Typically that means those times when there are a lot of sunspots, we say there's an active sun, and when there's a minimum or even no sunspots, that would be a passive or quiet sun. So at the time when the sunspots are maximum, the sun puts out more ultraviolet radiation than at other times. And so there's a question as to whether or not that might be a factor in warming the Earth. There's a lot of sunspots. And if there are very few sunspots, perhaps the Earth may be in for some cooler weather. Now, where do we get that idea from? Well, back in the early 1600s, there was a time called the Maunder minimum, when it was reported that the minimum number of sunspots were observed for a period of almost 50 years. And the historical record says that Europe especially had very, very cold winters during that time. So that's why people are somewhat worried about this perceived lack of sunspots right now. The sunspots were quite prolific. There was a lot of sunspots back in the year 2002, and that was a year of an active sun. And as most people know, there's an 11-year cycle to these sunspots, and every 11 years they reach a maximum, and 5.5 years in between there's a minimum. So there's an 11-year cycle between the minima and 11-year cycle between the maxima. And so if you look at this plot, back around 2009, there was a very, very minimal number of sunspots. But now here in 2014, we're back up to a reasonable number of sunspots. The thing of it is, 2013 should have been one of those 11-year peaks. And it was a very weak sort of peak. And that's, I think, what people are worried about, because they're worried about, gee, what's going to happen in the next 5 years or 50? The question is, can we blame the so-called global warming on the homomorphic man-made pollution, or is it something due to the sun? And if it is due to the sun, well, then we have to worry about, gee, if there's a minimum of sunspots, maybe we're in for another ice age, sort of. And so that's where the controversy is. And that is, do we have anything to worry about at all? And if we do, how bad is it going to get?
The electric sun model, as formulated by Donald Scott and Wal Thornhill, states that the sun is powered externally by electric currents from the galactic arm. This electric current typically fluctuates over an 11-year cycle, producing changes in both sunspot number and UV output. That means one cause with two effects: changes in sunspot number and changes in Earth's average temperature.
The activity of the sun being controlled externally means that whatever happens on the sun in terms of its sunspot cycle in particular will also have an effect on the Earth's weather and the climate. And this is exactly what we're seeing now. And the historical record, the Maunder minimum, shows that a lack of sunspots seems to be associated with very cold weather in the Northern Hemisphere. And that would fit with the electric universe model, where the Earth is a part of the sun's circuit, so that if the sun is receiving a kind of steady input, but it's different to what it was in the past, then the same would occur to the Earth's climate. And we should expect that if we are not having sunspots, as we apparently didn't back at the time of the Maunder minimum, then we should also expect the weather in the Northern Hemisphere to show the same kinds of effects. And that was the freezing of the Thames, having ice fares on the Thames, and cold weather in the Northern Hemisphere. But that doesn't mean there's cold weather everywhere. It simply means that the upper atmosphere wind patterns shift in such a way that you get a lot more cold air from the Arctic coming to lower latitudes. The charged particles from the sun constitute the electric current in the solar circuit, in the sun's circuit. And since we're part of that circuit, we are affected by that current and by those charged particles from the sun. What this means from the electrical sun model is that the Earth's climate changes, and it changes in response to changes in the sun. Any effects that we might cause as humans on the Earth pale into insignificance, and there is no real evidence that global warming, as they call it, climate change, is affected at all by human activity.
The more we've learned about the sun and the forces driving its activity, the more critical becomes our understanding of the Earth-Sun electrical connection. The sunspot number is not causing anything. It is an effect of the same thing that causes Earth's temperatures to vary: an incoming electric current.
It also happens that the magnetic field of the sun reverses every 11 years. Well, does that ring a bell? It's 11 years. Eh? That's in synchronism with the appearance and disappearance of the sunspots. And so the question is, what will cause this 11-year cycle to happen both in the magnetic field of the sun and in the sunspots? Well, of course, the Jurgen's electric sun model says that, yes, it's an electrical variation. What causes this electrical variation, we don't know. But think of it this way. We have two different observations. One is the number of sunspots, and one is the solar magnetic field. And they both vary the same way. Now, is one affecting the other? It's highly unlikely. But what is likely is that they both are caused by another source, and that is the variation in that input current to the sun. The monthly sunspot number, plotted from about 1980 through roughly the present day. And you can see three maxima there in the sunspot number. Well, the bottom plot there is pretty much the same time scale, and it plots the temperature variation in three places: in the lower troposphere, in the middle troposphere of Earth, and in the lower stratosphere. And the only thing that you can say is that, yes, it seems to fluctuate. There are a couple of very strange anomalies there, which are explained by that's El Chichon and Pinatubo. Both of those are volcanoes that cut loose. And they, at first, raised the temperature of the lower stratosphere. But then after they occurred, the temperature dropped. And if you forget about Pinatubo, which of course is a very extraneous effect, you can see there's a general cooling of the lower stratosphere. And then if you cast your eye to the upper plot and just sort of take a very coarse long-term average, you can see that the monthly sunspot number is also gradually declining the same way. So this then would suggest, it's not a very one-to-one correlation, obviously, but it does suggest a correlation, if you will, between the sunspot number and the temperature in the lower stratosphere of Earth. And again, I think that it's not that one is a cause of the other, but they're both resulting from perhaps a general long-term diminution in the input current.
For continuous updates on space news from the electric universe, stay tuned to thunderbolts.info. Welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info.
I'm here.
In part 2 of this presentation, we continue our discussion of late pioneer Halton Arp's contributions to science and astronomy. Proponents of plasma cosmology in the electric universe have paid special attention to Arp's theoretical research, including his thesis of intrinsic redshift. Arp's discoveries allow for a new cosmology free from the assumptions of the Big Bang and its bizarre mathematical speculations.
Arp's contribution to the electric universe is of fundamental importance because both are based on observation and experiment instead of mathematical speculation. Arp's discovery of the quantized redshift of quasars revealed the nonsense of particle physicists who believe that quantum effects only apply to the subatomic realm. Quasars are ejected from the nucleus of an active galaxy at a good fraction of the speed of light, which implies the matter in the quasar has extremely small initial mass. The quasars then slow down to become a companion galaxy, which implies their mass increases in quantum jumps over time. Arp was very interested in the implications of his discoveries. He related the frequency of the redshifted light from quasars to the youthfulness of newly created matter. He wrote in Seeing Red, "The younger the electron making the orbital jump, the less massive it will be, and the weaker, that is more redshifted, will be the emitted photon. Moreover, as the particles age, they become more massive. Therefore, the ensemble becomes more luminous. As its luminosity grows, its redshift drops, evolving into what we consider normal galaxies like our own. Also, as the assemblage ages, its growing mass slows its initial high ejection velocity in order to conserve momentum. The galaxies finish with very slow relative velocities, as observed. This is the kind of theory we are looking for, simple, capable of being visualized, one that can connect together the puzzling observational facts that presently confound understanding." That's the end of that quote. However, this is a radical assault on the beliefs of physicists because it puts a searchlight on the fact that they have no real explanation why matter has mass. It also shows that some of the cherished physical constants are quantized variables. Arp wrote, and I quote, "For the first time we have hard observational evidence for the evolution of different forms of organized extragalactic objects, the birth and maturing of younger objects into older objects." End of quote. This is a completely different view of the universe from the incoherent Big Bang. It accords perfectly with the work of plasma cosmologists who can explain the beautiful spiral form of galaxies in electrical terms. ARP was aware of plasma cosmology and the electric universe and had come independently to much the same conclusions concerning the Big Bang and the need for a new cosmology. Plasma cosmologists have an electrical galaxy model where current flows along the spiral arms to the centre of the galaxy, where it is stored and intermittently released in jets along the spin axis. The centres of galaxies are simply explained not as impossible black holes, but as the most concentrated form of stored electromagnetic energy, known in the laboratory as a plasma focus, and used sometimes as a particle gun. So quasars are shot from the heart of their parent galaxy by prodigious electromagnetic forces. Of course, mass and energy are related by the well-known equation E equals mc squared. So the mass of the galactic plasmoid at the centre of the galaxy, which may be less than the size of our tiny solar system and composed of relativistic charged particles, can produce the observed gravitational effects of billions of stars. There are no black holes. The electromagnetic jet that connects the parent galaxy to its baby quasar is the umbilical cord that carries the electrical energy to increase the mass of its embryonic galaxy over time. Should we be surprised that ARP's view of the cosmos has almost biological overtones? In the final paragraphs of Quasars, Redshifts and Controversies, we see the measure of a real scientist, as ARP writes of his thoughts on matter generation in active galactic nuclei and quantized redshift. It is still just a working hypothesis, to be discarded or modified as further observations are made to test it. In fact, its major usefulness is probably only to promote further observations. Yet always the hope is that we have achieved some fuller, deeper understanding of the universe we live in." End of quote. The electric universe acknowledges the brilliance and courage of Halton ARP. Like Galileo, his contribution to science will be acknowledged for all time.
For continuous updates on space news from the electric universe, stay tuned. Welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info. On December 28, 2013, the acclaimed astronomer Halton ARP passed away at the age of 86 in his home in Munich, Germany. ARP posed a challenge to the very foundations of modern cosmology, a challenge that only grows more relevant with new, astonishing discoveries. We present Wal Thornhill as we honor ARP's remarkable contributions to science and astronomy.
I was first introduced to Halton ARP's work by Mel and Amy Aitchison after one of our very first meetings in Portland, Oregon. They could see the relevance of ARP's discoveries to the electric universe that I was then presenting. That was in the mid-90s. In September 2000, I had my first meeting with Halton ARP in Portland, once again at one of the Electric Universe meetings. And it was quite a historic meeting because of the other people who were there, in particular Tony Peratt, who is known for his groundbreaking work in plasma cosmology. And the input from both of these people to the electric universe has been considerable. It was only a month later in October that I actually shared the stage in London with Halton ARP. Unfortunately, he was busy at the time, involved with a filmmaker making the documentary The Cosmology Quest, which is now available on DVD. Halton, known as Chip ARP, was a professional astronomer who, earlier in his career, conducted Edwin Hubble's NOVA search in M31. He earned the Helen B. Warner Prize, the Newcomb Cleveland Award, and the Alexander von Humboldt Senior Scientist Award. For 28 years, he was staff astronomer at the Mount Palomar and Mount Wilson observatories. While there, he produced his well-known catalogue of peculiar galaxies that are disturbed or irregular in appearance. ARP discovered that many pairs of quasars with extremely high redshift values are physically connected to galaxies that have low redshift and are known to be relatively close by. Yet according to the Big Bang expanding universe, the high redshift quasars must be located far behind the nearby galaxy. Because of ARP's observations, the assumption that high redshift objects have to be very far away, on which the Big Bang theory and all of accepted cosmology is based, has to be fundamentally re-examined.
While mainstream cosmology has come to embrace the story of the Big Bang and the expanding universe, cosmologist Carl Sagan noted the challenge that Halton Arp's discoveries pose to the standard theory. In his 1980 bestseller Cosmos, Sagan wrote, "There is nevertheless a nagging suspicion among some astronomers that all may not be right with a deduction from the redshift of galaxies via the Doppler effect, that the universe is expanding. The astronomer Halton Arp has found enigmatic and disturbing cases where a galaxy and a quasar, or a pair of galaxies that are in apparent physical association, have very different redshifts. However, some believe that institutional science's response to Arp's challenge is a disturbing example of political suppression."
Arp's life story exemplifies everything that's wrong with modern showbiz science. His paper, Companion Galaxies on the Ends of Spiral Arms, which offered a fundamental challenge to Big Bang cosmology, had Subramanian Chandrasekhar's scrawl across the top corner, "This exceeds my imagination." That may have been so, given Chandrasekhar and those like him had a great deal to lose, but it was not a scientific reason for rejection of Arp's observations. However, Arp's telescope time was curtailed and he was forced to continue his research in Germany. Halton Arp has been dubbed a modern Galileo because other scientists refuse to see what is obvious even to amateur astronomers, that low redshift galaxies are often found connected to high redshift companions. Clearly, most of the redshift is intrinsic to the companions. At a single stroke, Arp removed the foundation for Big Bang cosmology. He had in fact proven Edwin Hubble, his mentor, correct, for Hubble had written in the Royal Astronomical Society monthly notices in 1937, and I quote, "If the redshifts are a Doppler shift, the observations as they stand lead to the anomaly of a closed universe, curiously small and dense, and it may be added, suspiciously young. On the other hand, if redshifts are not Doppler effects, these anomalies disappear and the region observed appears as a small, homogeneous, but insignificant portion of a universe extended indefinitely both in space and time." End of quote. The irony is that the constant defining the hypothetical rate of expansion of the universe bears Hubble's name. The winners rewrite history. Arp proved Hubble right. We live in a universe extended indefinitely both in space and time. Halton Arp believed in the scientific approach more strongly, it seems, than do mainstream scientists. Arp notes that his opponents invariably stated that, and I quote, "The observations cannot be accepted because there's no theory to explain them." End of quote. Of course, the companion statement was always, and I quote again, "There is no need to modify conventional theories because there are no valid observations which contradict them." Clearly, these two statements have always provided the perfect double bind against progress in the subject. Arp has had dramatic confirmation, which involved also Sir Fred Hoyle, Geoffrey and Margaret Burbage, and J. Nalekar. And he says, with one object, NGC 3516, we had confirmed 1, the alignment of quasars along the minor axis, that is the spin axis of the parent galaxy. 2, the decay of the redshift and increase of luminosity as the quasars travelled outward. 3, their evolution into companion galaxies. And 4, and very important, the quantization of the evolving redshift steps. Arp writes, "Since science is supposed to be characterized by successful prediction, it is significant to note that this most important single observation of quasars being ejected from an active low redshift galaxy was rejected without ever being sent to a referee by that leading journal of trustworthy and important results, Nature magazine." Arp also writes, "The most influential people in the field, in their jovial camaraderie, would simply ridicule anyone who had reported discordant results. How can one fight rumour? I think the only answer is that one must fundamentally change the structure of academic science. Communication must be directly to fellow researchers and the public with no chance of censorship."
This is why people don't know about
The cancelling of Arp's telescope time and the suppression of all discovery mode programs is a testimony to the extreme fear that the opposing side has of this kind of research, that they would ruthlessly seek out and subdue this small effort. On the other hand, it raises the question of whether the enormous financial, engineering and administrative effort put into astronomical research today is being wasted at the point of application by scientists who believe they already know all of the important answers.
For continuous updates on space news from the electric universe, stay tuned to thunderbolts.info.
Oh, your uncle's an ageist. He's into that ageism.
Welcome to Space
Only hires
News
the
from the
elders.
Electric Universe, brought to you by the
I know you
Thunderbolts
meant elders,
Project
I'm just kidding.
at thunderbolts.info. In part 2 of this presentation, physicist Wal Thornhill continues his discussion of the growing confusion in theoretical physics. While sensational news headlines sometimes laud definitive science breakthroughs, such as the supposed discovery of the so-called God particle, in reality, more and more scientists are warning that physics and cosmology have reached a state of crisis. The depth of this crisis was summarized in a recent speech by Dr. Neil Turok, the director of the Perimeter Institute for Theoretical Physics. Dr. Turok states, "Theoretical physics is at a crossroads right now. In a sense, we've entered a very deep crisis. If you ask most theorists working on particle
Hey Josh,
physics,
where's your
they're in a
rent,
state
man?
of
Did you lose
confusion.
your rent?
The extensions of the standard model, like grand unified theories, were supposed to
Did you leave it
simplify,
on the other
but
side
in
of the
fact,
garage?
they made it more complicated. It's the ultimate
Heard it. Here's another
catastrophe
rent.
that theoretical physics has led to this crazy situation where the physicists are utterly confused and seem not to have any predictions at all. This confusion may be evident in popular science media, in which the general public receives speculations ranging from the bizarre to the nonsensical.
Now, if I haven't convinced you that mathematical theorists aren't scientists but players of mind games, then perhaps a news report of December the 13th will tip the balance. It's headlined, "Could the universe collapse today? Physicists claim that risk is more likely than ever and may have already started." And I quote, "The universe could be about to collapse and everything in it, including us, will be compressed into a small, hard ball. The process may already have started somewhere in our cosmos and is eating away at the rest of the universe, according to theoretical physicists. The mind-bending concept has been around for a while, but now researchers in Denmark claim they have proven it is possible with mathematical equations." End of quote. You can't prove anything with mathematical equations. They merely describe observations in a way that might provide new information and insights. But if the mathematics is based on false or unrealistic concepts, or applied inappropriately, the interpretation will not reflect reality. This news article in the Mail Online is a glaring example, and I quote again. "The basis of the theory is that sooner or later a radical shift in the forces of the universe will cause every particle in it to become extremely heavy. Everything, every grain of sand, every planet and every galaxy will become billions of times heavier than it is now." End of quote. Now, this prediction is from theorists who do not understand why matter has mass. Amazingly, they have a standard model of massless particles. There's no such particle. Instead, theorists conjure up a cosmic treacle of Higgs particles to produce the effect of mass in other subatomic particles. I quote again. "The theory suggests that the new weight will squeeze all material into a small, super hot and heavy ball, and the universe as we know it will cease to exist. This violent process is called a phase transition and is similar to what happens when, for example, water turns to steam or a magnet heats up and loses its power." End of quote. Now, theorists are fond of invoking super dense matter and super heavy objects simply because their equations need it to make their crazy gravitational models work. No one has ever observed super dense matter. I quote again. "According to something known as the Higgs theory, a phase transition such as this took place 1/10 of a billionth of a second after the Big Bang, causing a shift in the fabric of space-time." End of quote. The Higgs theory merely demonstrates that theorists have no real idea what they're talking about. According to this theory, particles gain mass by interacting with the so-called Higgs field that permeates all space. But this field is another barnacle on theoretical physics that will need scraping off in future. As for the Big Bang, the evidence has been available for decades that the universe is not expanding. There was no Big Bang. Of course, an expanding universe gave great joy to the mathematicians because it allowed them to reconstruct a fanciful, pseudo-religious story of the creation of the universe from a non-physical point. But miraculous creation is not allowed in physics. And I've already discussed the unreality of space-time, which here is given totally undeserved solidity by describing it as a fabric. Reading articles like this, the mind is numbed by words that have no meaning, but give a verisimilitude of scientific meaning. Now, Professor Herbert Dingle was an English physicist and natural philosopher who served as president of the Royal Astronomical Society from 1951 to 1953. For a time, he wrote the entry on special relativity for the Encyclopaedia Britannica. That was until he realised that it made the mistake of interpreting perception as reality. He became the centre of a famous controversy concerning special relativity. So in 1970, he published a book titled Science at the Crossroads. In it, he wrote of his peers, and I quote, "As a general rule, the practice of mathematical physics goes hand in hand with lack of elementary reasoning power and of that normal form of human wisdom, somewhat misleadingly called common sense, that provides its own corrective of premature judgment and never allows the requirements of reason and experience to be overcome by the seductions of attractive speculations." So despite the warnings in Herbert Dingle's book, Science at the Crossroads, modern science barreled through the crossroads against the red light and all the road closed warning signs so that today it is headed for the inevitable crash.
For continuous updates on space news from the electric universe, stay tuned to thunderbolts.info. Welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info. A new paper published by an MIT physicist claims to theoretically prove that so-called quantum entanglement, or two particles each seemingly occupying multiple states simultaneously, gives rise to a wormhole which allows particles to communicate through a so-called gravitational tunnel. This theory follows from a paper published earlier this year, which suggests that when two black holes become entangled, then are pulled apart, a wormhole is created which connects the black holes. The reasoning in these papers follows from a purely mathematical approach to physics and cosmology. In this two-part presentation, physicist Wal Thornhill examines just how reliable this approach is at describing how the universe actually works.
A glaring example of the irrational is to be seen in a recent Science Daily report titled "You Can't Get Entangled Without a Wormhole," which refers to papers by Julian Sonner, a senior postdoc in MIT's Lab for Nuclear Science and Centre for Theoretical Physics, and a related paper by Kristen Jensen of the University of Victoria and Andreas Karsch of the University of Washington. The article says that essentially, entanglement involves two particles, each occupying multiple states at once, a condition referred to as superposition. For example, both particles may simultaneously spin clockwise and counterclockwise, but neither has a definite state until one is measured, causing the other particle to instantly assume a corresponding state. The resulting correlations between the particles are preserved even if they reside on opposite ends of the universe. End of quote. Now, the word entanglement is a euphemism to hide the fact that the physical connection is unknown. So all that follows isn't physics, it's mystification.
Thanks, Nick.
The indeterminacy of states also means
Black
we're
holes
not
don't
dealing
exist,
with physics,
Starscream.
which relies on being able to determine the state of the system being observed. From a real physicist's point of view, the most telling experimental fact is that the connection between two entangled particles is instantaneous, even if they reside on opposite ends of the universe.
You're right.
So the article asks the question, but what enables particles to communicate instantaneously and seemingly faster than the speed of light over such distances? The simple classical physics answer is that the connection between the two particles is not via a slow transverse electromagnetic wave. Instead, it's the same kind of connection that we observe between the planets and the sun. That is, gravity. Newton's law of gravity does not include time. The force of gravity acts instantaneously. Now, the electric universe explains that gravity itself is a form of the electric force that operates upon neutral bodies by distorting the subatomic charged particles within those bodies to form tiny, weak electric dipoles.
Are y'all listening
This
to that?
simple model explains why gravity is such a weak force, because subatomic particles are infinitesimally small, and also why you can't easily shield from gravity, because all of the subatomic particles participate, whether it's a conductor or a non-conductor, whatever it's made from. Importantly, though, gravity on the cosmic scale allows us to see that the direct electric force between particles operates instantly. The spookiness and non-locality of quantum phenomena can be understood both physically and in meaningful language. Entanglement, then, is simply an electrical resonance between two subatomic particles, each comprised of an identical resonance system of orbiting charged subparticles. In other words, it's a repeated pattern, like an atom within an atom. The instantaneous connection maintains the resonance or entanglement between the particles regardless of their relative movement or distance apart.
Yeah.
Because the connection is instantaneous, there is no Doppler shift detuning or anything like that. The two particles remain in communication. This model that separates the phenomenon of electromagnetic waves in a medium from the direct longitudinal connection between all matter in the universe, that is the electrical connection, opens up new insights for physicists. For example, physicists attempt to isolate their experiment from outside influences, including the observer. But in our electric universe, there is no isolated system. The observer is a part of the experiment, whether he likes it or not, and as discovered in so-called weird quantum experiments. Contrast this simple explanation with the meaningless language of the report, and I quote, "Earlier this year, physicists proposed an answer in the form of wormholes or gravitational tunnels. The group showed that by creating two entangled black holes, then pulling them apart, they formed a wormhole, essentially a shortcut through the universe, connecting the distant black holes. Now, black holes are a mathematical mistake equivalent to the school mathematics howler of dividing by zero to get infinity. Gravity is weaker than the electric force by a factor of 1,000 billion times. Now, that's as close to zero as you can get. So using gravity to explain the concentrated energy sources observed at the centers of galaxies and calling them black holes is bound to give you answers that make no physical sense. The wormholes are a geometric construct in more than 3 dimensions, so they have nothing to do with the real space that physicists, engineers, and you and I have to deal with." But the article continues. "Now an MIT physicist has found that, looking through the lens of string theory, the creation of two entangled quarks, the building blocks of matter, simultaneously give rise to a wormhole connecting the pair." That's the end of the quote. But string theory is, according to Peter Woit, not even wrong. The questions that need to be answered by this piece of whimsy are both endless and pointless. Pointless because no one knows what a quark is, nor how matter can warp space to form a hole across the universe, or even what that means, nor how that effect can be instantaneous. Space is merely a concept of location in 3 dimensions. How do you warp a concept? But the article goes on. The theoretical results bolster the relatively new and exciting idea that the laws of gravity holding together the universe may not be fundamental, but arise from something else. Quantum entanglement. That's hardly a breakthrough when you don't understand quantum entanglement. You'll notice that modern physics is in the business of complicating things beyond comprehension, inventing new particles and forces in the hope of a Nobel Prize. It is not the way classical physics was done. Classical physics, until the beginning of the 20th century, was in the business of simplifying particles and forces. There was a strong intuitive feel on the part of leading scientists then that gravity is simply an electrical force of some description, like the forces between atoms that form our Earth and everything on it. That's the conclusion of the electric universe based on all the new evidence since then. The article says, "Of course, there appears to be a major barrier to reconciling quantum mechanics and general relativity. For years, physicists have tried to come up with a theory of quantum gravity to marry the two fields." You'll notice that the standard picture of a black hole or a gravitational object in space is represented as a funnel in space-time, usually with an object like, in the Earth's case, the moon perched on the edge of the funnel, with the idea being that the moon, instead of traversing a straight line in space, follows the curve of the funnel. However, the very image itself gives a false picture because we just assume that this gravitational well or funnel has gravity pulling from underneath to draw the object down into the funnel. But this is using gravity to explain gravity. It's a circular argument, and the image is quite misleading. An object perched on the surface of this funnel, if gravity were not pulling it down, would remain fixed on that funnel. It would have no force tending to move it downwards or sideways or upwards. it would remain exactly where it is. But it's plain to see that general relativity never explained gravity. It merely describes its effect in a geometry that has no reality. And quantum mechanics is a recipe book with no understanding of the ingredients or how they interact. As a result, the rest of the article is appalling nonsense headlined, "Tunneling to the Fifth Dimension." It's only necessary to highlight the meaningless language to show the ideas expressed are imaginary. For example, two entangled black holes forgets that the mathematics of black hole theory allows only a single black hole in an empty universe. The Newtonian principle of superposition of gravitating objects doesn't apply to general relativity. There can never be a second black hole to get entangled.
We know.
The theorists invoke a wormhole, a tunnel through space-time, produced by pulling two black holes apart. Hyphenating the words space and time to produce a fourth dimension is physically meaningless. Mathematicians use the word dimension to mean a degree of freedom in their equations. There are only three physical dimensions in space, which are measured by length and direction. Time has no length or direction. You can't point in the direction of time. Time has no arrow. Joining space and time has no physical significance. So you cannot produce physical wormholes in space. It is pure science fiction. One of the authors, Sonner, applied this thinking to quarks, the theoretical subatomic building blocks of matter. And I quote, "To see what emerges from two entangled quarks, he first generated quarks using the Schwinger effect, a concept in quantum theory that enables one to create particles out of nothing." End of quote. Here we see mathematicians resorting to dismissal of a principle of physics that you cannot perform a creation miracle. It's not scientific. The author Douglas Adams in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy parodied this sleight of hand mercilessly when Zaphod Beeblebrock used an infinite improbability drive to rescue Ford Prefect and Arthur Dent in deep space. Particle physicists have been using the infinite improbability principle since the inception of quantum theory. As is well known, Einstein hated the idea. He's reported to have said, "God doesn't throw dice." He was right. As soon as you disconnect cause from effect, you are not doing science. Another quote from the article, Sonner mapped the entangled quarks onto a four-dimensional space, considered a representation of space-time. In contrast, gravity is thought to exist in the next dimension as, according to Einstein's laws, it acts to bend and shape space-time, thereby existing in the fifth dimension. End of quote. There is no four-dimensional space. There is no physical fifth dimension. Gravity is not explained by general relativity. It is merely described in a limited and unreal geometric way. It is not shown how imaginary four-dimensional space can be walked. Cause and effect are disconnected. It just ain't science. It's merely mathematics. The article finally leaves all common sense and logic far behind. And I quote, "To see what geometry may emerge in the fifth dimension from entangled quarks in the fourth, Sonner employed holographic duality, a concept in string theory. While a hologram is a two-dimensional object, it contains all the information necessary to represent a three-dimensional view. Essentially, holographic duality is a way to derive a more complex dimension from the next lowest dimension." End of quote. This is total rubbish. There is no two-dimensional object. All objects are three-dimensional, so there can be no information held in two dimensions. Real objects and information can only occupy three dimensions. Coming back to the Space News report, the black hole is an alleged product of Einstein's theory of gravitation, but so is the wormhole between the two supposed black holes. It's known as an Einstein-Rosen bridge. But then the wormhole is used and related to the two black holes to define gravitation. Gravity emerges from the more fundamental phenomenon of entangled black holes, the article says. But this argument is simply a circular argument, and so it is nonsense.
For continuous updates on space news from the electric universe, stay tuned to thunderbolts.info. Welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info. A newly discovered exoplanet poses a radical challenge to the consensus theory of planet and star formation. The massive exoplanet is 11 times the size of Jupiter, Yet it circles its parent star at a distance that is 650 times the average distance between the Earth and the Sun. In the conventional theory, which imagines stars and planets forming gravitationally in a collapsing cloud of gas and dust, such a giant planet cannot form at such a vast distance from its star. Lead investigator Vanessa Bailey states, "This system is especially fascinating because no model of either planet or star formation fully explains what we see." What does the electric universe theory of planet and star formation tell us about this new discovery?
This discovery doesn't match what astronomers expected to see for the simple reason that the expectations are based on a model which is centuries old and has never been challenged. In fact, we have another situation rather like that of the flat Earth, where data to the contrary piles up but is not accepted because everyone just knows that the Earth is flat. In the same way, astronomers believe that the planets are formed in a flat disk about a star. But it's been known for decades now, and in fact, it was predicted.
All right, let this video be known right now that all these flat earthers that are running around talking about how the electric universe supports them, obviously they do not support them. You see that?
Predicted by plasma physicists, those who have indulged
Another
in what's
example
known
of
as
them
plasma
trying
cosmology.
to hijack one of our truths
in the
to
equivalent
add
of
it to some
cosmic
ridiculous
lightning
flat
bolt
earth nonsense.
in a molecular cloud. And with the latest infrared telescopes in space and on the ground, it's been possible to actually photograph these stars in infrared, and they are strung like bright beads on a glowing string. So if this is the way condensed bodies are formed, it has nothing to do with a gravitational collapse from a clump of gas and dust. So that all models which attempt to try and explain a system like this one, where we have an 11 Jupiter-sized planet orbiting at 650 times the distance of the Earth from the Sun, you should compare this with Neptune, which is only 30 times the distance of the Earth from the Sun, and that's now our outermost planet in our solar system. So 650 times away, it took some time before it was shown that the planet actually was associated with this particular star. But of course, the problem of forming Neptune has never been answered. How do we form a gas giant at 30 times the distance of the Earth from the Sun? And now we have a planet which is 11 times the size of Jupiter being formed at 650 times the distance of the Earth from the Sun.
An alternative theory considered by mainstream scientists is that distant giant planets may form in a manner comparable to a binary star system. However, the mass ratio between the giant exoplanet and its parent star is more than 10 times too great for this theory to work. Lead investigator Vanessa Bailey states, "This extreme mass ratio is not predicted from binary star formation theories, just like planet formation theory predicts that we cannot form planets so far from the host star."
Of course, it was suggested that the 11 times Jupiter-sized planet was a kind of failed binary star. But according to astronomers, the mass ratio of two stars in a binary system is typically no more than 10 to 1. In this case, it's about 100 to 1. And this extreme mass ratio is not predicted from binary star formation theories, just like planet formation theory predicts we cannot form planets so far from the host star. One of the problems that astronomers face is that they are using gravity alone to try and explain orbiting systems in space. And without any real understanding of gravity, this is bound to lead to contradictions and discoveries like the one we have here. In the electrical formation model of stars, smaller objects will also be formed along that cosmic lightning bolt. And when they are formed, some of them will be sufficiently close to each other that once the lightning more or less subsides and fades, the two objects will be gravitationally attracted towards one another. The other problem that gravitational theory faces, though, is that capture is a very unlikely process, because if two bodies swing past one another, unless there is a loss of energy between the two, motional energy, then the body passing nearby will merely swing past and then off into deep space. So there has to be something else going on, and capture must be more prevalent than gravitational theory at present can allow. One of the breakthrough ideas in the electric universe model is that gravity itself is a form of dipolar electric force which is dependent upon the charge distribution inside a star. And if there is any exchange of charge at the surface of that star, that will change the gravitational force between two objects. And in fact, it is a means of achieving capture because you're exchanging electrical energy for motional energy. That is, the trajectory of the star coming past another star will be altered in such a way that capture is more certain. Now, the formation of binary systems would seem to follow naturally from the formation nearby in a cosmic lightning bolt. But as I said, objects of different sizes, including the sizes of gas giants, will also be formed in that cosmic lightning bolt, so that capture of an object 11 times the size of Jupiter at a distance of 650 times the Earth-Sun distance from a star is far more likely and is explicable. It's even predictable. I wish to emphasize that there is more than one way to form a planetary system electrically. A common alternative is for a star to electrically eject matter in a nova outburst to form a so-called hot Jupiter. The discovery of hot Jupiters closely orbiting their parent stars is simply another mystery for the accretion disk story.
The discovery of seemingly baffling exoplanets may inevitably force a reconsideration of our own solar system.
In an earlier space news, I talked about the improbability of our planetary system having been formed according to the disk of dust and gas and gravitational collapse model. The more exoplanets that are being found, the number in the hundreds or even thousands now, the more the gravitational model of the formation of the solar system comes into question. Because exoplanets have been found which orbit in planes other than so-called ecliptic or the equatorial plane of the star, and some planets have been found which orbit in a retrograde fashion, the opposite direction to other planets in that system. None of these fit a gravitational collapse model, so that we have to look at a kind of modified dynamics, modified gravitational model, which can allow capture and also provide stability, because the other elephant in the room is that gravitational theory alone does not predict stability. The gravitational system, suffering minor perturbations, has no means of correcting them so that they grow over time and result in the expulsion of planets from the system. But that's not what we observe either here in our solar system or in some of these other crazy systems of exoplanets, where the exoplanets seem to do almost what they like. An independent Jupiter-sized object will always be a minor star in an electric universe. A Jupiter-sized object outside the Sun's immediate electrical influence, beyond the heliosphere, will be a secondary focus for interstellar Birkeland current filaments, like those powering the Sun. The Jupiter-sized object will naturally be a brown dwarf star radiating mostly in the infrared. Now, the process of entry of a brown dwarf star inside the heliosphere results in its electrical power being shut off so that it becomes a gas giant planet. The sudden change on entering the Sun's electrical domain results in the new gas giant discharging matter to achieve electrical balance. That discharged matter forms cometary material, a ring of debris, and numerous satellites. So it's easy to see that the Sun's family of distant gas giant planets were captured. Saturn, with its spectacular rings, was merely the latest addition to the Sun's family. So the solar system is an adopted family with a complex recent history. Of course, mathematical theorists will not like this, but those with a forensic approach will enjoy the new challenges opened up in an electric universe.
For continuous updates on space news from the electric universe, stay tuned to thunderbolts.info. Welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info. In November of 2013, skywatchers around the world eagerly awaited the approach of the comet ISON. Dubbed the Comet of the Century by several in the media, some astronomers had predicted a stupendous cometary display as ISON approached its perihelion. The comet was also the subject of countless bizarre speculations, from the claim that ISON had somehow turned Mars into a comet, to the idea that ISON was actually the planet Nibiru. However, despite the heightened expectations, ISON ultimately proved to be something of a fizzle. On November 28th, scientists first suspected that ISON had disintegrated as its activity appeared to cease. But as the comet moved away from the sun, it appeared to flare up before disappearing. Today, astronomers are uncertain as to whether the comet has fully disintegrated or if inactive fragments may have survived. But several unanswered questions remain about Comet Ison, beginning with astronomers' early overestimation of the size of the comet nucleus. NASA's official timeline of Comet Ison's journey states, NASA's Hubble Space Telescope observed Ison at 386 million miles away from the Sun on April 10th. Preliminary Hubble observations provided surprising results. The nucleus of the comet appeared to be no larger than 3 to 4 miles across. Since the comet was so bright and so active, scientists had assumed the nucleus was larger. However, the estimated size of the nucleus was later downgraded to less than 1 mile. Why do astronomers face such difficulties in estimating the size of a comet nucleus?
Oh, YouTube has no love for me, bro. Was overestimated at the beginning, and it was downgraded in April to about 3 to 4 miles across. But even then, it was expected that as it went around the sun and being on its first journey,
I don't monetize my channel, so I don't let them do shit to my shit. I mean, occasionally if somebody catches like some song piece or whatever, they'll put like an ad on my shit, nothing I can do about it. But other than that, I mean, I don't do shit
its electrical effects
like that. And I hit them on the head without big pharma and big agro and the biotech firms. And, you know, internal dimensions of world affairs. Shit you don't hear really from anybody. You just hear
surrounded the solid body of the nucleus, measured over 3,000 miles in diameter. But in the electrical model, the size of the coma bears no relationship to the size of the object, but to its electrical characteristics, how much charge it carries compared to its surroundings. We have an earlier example where Comet Holmes' coma surprised astronomers by being the largest object in the solar system. When Comet Ison travelled closest to the sun, it fizzled out, and in fact it was thought for a while that it had disappeared completely. So the question is, how do you take a half-mile wide comet and turn it into nothing? Well, the answer is that the comet display is an electrical phenomenon, so the body itself can remain intact but not put on such a display. I think this is what happened in the case of Comet Ison. In fact, the tail afterwards, when it did reappear, was faint and appeared more like a dusty tail rather than the normal electrical tail. That could have been due mainly to the intense heating of the surface materials. So it's probably one time when the standard model of comets actually was applicable.
While most astronomers predicted a great display from Ison at its perihelion, the predictions of one astronomer who has studied the light signatures of several comets proved to be the most accurate.
Everyone seemed to be predicting that Comet Ison would turn on a magnificent display as it left the sun and headed towards the outer solar system once again. However, there is one scientist who has a lot of experience with comets, and he was able to point out that it was entirely predictable that Comet Ison would fizzle out. He felt that it would entirely disintegrate. Now, the fact that there's some remnant appears to have appeared after passing the sun doesn't denigrate his work at all, because he has taken readings of the brightnesses of many, many comets and shown that I think there are about 4 other comets who showed the same characteristics as Comet Ison. That is, the brightness of the comet increases until it gets to a certain distance from the sun, and then it suddenly decreases and then flattens out and doesn't increase as expected. Now, he predicted back in July of this year that Comet Ison would disappear, and he was almost right, it seems, with this particular comet. From the electrical point of view, looking at comets as an electrical phenomenon, it seems that we have to be careful not to apply the electrical model to the exclusion of the standard model. And I say this because the electrical model of a comet provides the star-like brightness of the nucleus in the form of cathode discharge. It provides explanations for its filamentary tails, which are not explained very well by standard theory. But what happens if the discharge goes out? If for some reason the comet reaches accommodation with its environment and the discharge quenches? And this is quite sudden. And this is the kind of thing that the astronomer Ignacio Ferrin points out in his paper, that the light curve of these comets that fizzle out suddenly drops. It's a sudden event, and it's not explained by any standard theory. However, from
Hey,
the electrical model, of course, an electrical discharge can stop suddenly. It stops and starts suddenly. Ignacio Ferrin points out that the very sharp discontinuity in brightness of the comet as it approaches the orbit of the Earth and closer to the Sun implies that it's not an outburst, a cometary outburst. And he says there is some fundamental physical process that goes on here that we do not understand. And I would suggest that that physical process is the quenching of prior electric discharges. So it appears that in the case of Comet Ison, it was already beginning to sputter. The discharge was beginning to sputter before it reached its orbit close to the Sun. And when it went around the Sun, it brightened up, of course. But after passing the Sun, it appears that all we saw was a dusty tail and no nucleus. And this is what I would expect if the discharge was quenched and the dust and so on that was being produced was rather like that of an asteroid. Recent asteroids have shown a dusty tail as they passed around the Sun. In that case, just the sheer heating of any volatile material on the surface or the extreme gravitational effects as the comet swings around the Sun, all of these things can tend to tear it apart or to pull material off the surface and distribute it. Referring to Professor Ferrin's statement that the complexity of the change in brightness of Comet Ison and others like it is unexplained, should also be looked at from the electrical comet model from the point of view of the change in nature of the surface of the comet as it gets very close to the Sun. As it's out beyond Earth's orbit, the comet acts like what's known as a cold cathode. In other words, the material of the cathode itself is cool. In fact, it's very cold in the case of comet. However, when it reaches the vicinity of the Sun and swings close by the Sun, that cold cathode becomes a hot cathode, and the discharge characteristics will change as a result. And this is the kind of thing that's noted by Professor Ferrin in his charts of the brightness changes in comets. So this is something else that has to be considered. So the comet behavior is quite complex. At present, the astronomical view of comets as being dirty snowballs just does not fit. An entirely new approach is required.
A different modality.
For continuous updates on space news from the electric universe, stay tuned to thunderbolts.info. Welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info. The most luminous electromagnetic event known to occur in the heavens is the gamma ray burst. For many years, scientists have claimed that most gamma ray bursts occur when stars run out of nuclear fuel, then collapse to form a black hole, neutron star, or quark star. However, a recently detected gamma ray burst has left astronomers openly baffled. Most gamma ray bursts are thought to be seen in the so-called early universe, and even those of a long duration are believed to only last from a few seconds to a few minutes. However, astronomers were astonished to discover that the gamma ray burst 130427A lasted for an unprecedented 20 hours at a distance of just 3.8 billion light-years from Earth. Astrophysicist Charles Dermer states, "Some of our theories are just going down the drain. This is hard to explain with our current models." What does the electric universe tell us about the nature of gamma ray bursts?
It's not really surprising, that this kind of thing is happening because the theory of how stars are formed, what they are composed of, and their internal structure is over 100 years old. And it hasn't been seriously revised because the basic ideas have remained the same for a century. The standard view of high energy radiation is based on either the collapse of a massive star, the subsequent explosion, and then the collision of material from the exploding star with stationary matter surrounding the star. None of these methods are what we consider useful in engineering or in medicine, for instance, where if we want to produce high energy radiation for medical x-rays or for industrial x-rays, we simply use an electrical discharge, and that can be done very easily and very controllably. Astronomers have limited themselves by assuming that gravity is the only force in action here, either in the collapse of a star or the subsequent explosion. In fact, it's been admitted just a few months earlier that how a star explodes is not explained. So what we have here is conjecture and assumptions piled upon assumptions, and now it's all falling apart, and it's taken 46 years for this to happen. It was Hans Alfvén, the Nobel Prize winner in plasma physics and also the father of plasma cosmology, who pointed out decades ago that astronomers were missing something basic in the form of what he called double layers, electrical double layers, which are formed when electric current flows through a plasma. He said that these double layers should be classified as interstellar objects and intergalactic objects because they radiate energy rather like a star can, and they radiate radio noise. In other words, they are the sources of high energy radiation. But since astronomers have ignored what Alfvén had to say when he pointed out that their theories of plasma physics and what's going on in space is incorrect, the theories that the astronomers have restricted themselves to are now struggling, and the anomalies are coming in.
While scientists have been unable to simulate a supernova explosion in a supercomputer using the standard model, the electrical interpretation of supernovae might more easily explain these intense electromagnetic emissions in deep space.
When we talk about high energy explosions in space, the most regular and spectacular ones, of course, are supernovae explosions. And yet it has been admitted that supernovae explosions cannot be explained by current theory. In the standard theory, the nuclear reactions in the core fizzle out once there is a preponderance of heavy elements in the core, which are unable to be converted into heavier elements and release energy. At that point, it's assumed that the shutoff is rather sudden, and then the outer regions of the star, which is supported by the radiant energy from this nuclear explosion going on in the center, suddenly collapse. And in the process of collapse, there is a rebound and this production of vast amounts of neutrinos, which streak out from the center of the star and are registered on Earth, particularly in this regard with supernova 1987A, when the neutrinos are actually registered from that supernova. Now, the whole theory is extremely complex, and it's based on ideas which have never been proven, particularly the idea that matter can be compressed beyond all normal states to become super dense. And in fact, in a neutron star, where the atoms collapse themselves to form neutrons, the electrons join with the protons in the nucleus to form pure neutron material. Now, there's no real evidence that this can be done. However, it's assumed simply on the basis that some stars send out pulses of radiation, which are interpreted as the end product of the supernova, and an object which is super dense and rotates extremely rapidly and sends out a lighthouse beam of radiation to the Earth, which is picked up as a pulse signal. None of this has been satisfactorily explained, and there is no experimental evidence that this is the case. However, the plasma cosmologists have analysed the radiation, which is quite complex, from a supernova, and have been able to explain it in terms of electrical engineering, pulsed signals in transmission lines. And they say that the signals come from a normal star where there are discharges in the magnetosphere which cause these ringing pulses to be sent out from the star. It has nothing to do with a lighthouse or a spinning supercondensed object. I think that astrophysicists continually get into trouble by postulating states of matter and also the behaviour of matter, which cannot be observed in the laboratory. The standard model of a gamma ray burst has all of the activity centred on a star or the collapse of a star, which means that whatever happens very quickly and the energy is released normally within about 30 seconds. However, the electric universe model has the star connected to a circuit which is gigantic compared to the size of the star. In fact, the star itself at the center of this circuit is like a speck of dust. The circuits that feed a star can be seen in planetary nebulae. The star appears as a bright point at the neck of the hourglass. Now, when a discharge to a star reaches a certain current density, it is possible for that current to be suddenly shut off, as if a switch is thrown. A good example of the sudden closing or opening of a circuit which carries a vast amount of power can be seen on Earth, where the high voltage transmission lines reach a switch yard, and when those switches are thrown, you can see a discharge which lasts for seconds, and a lot of energy, a lot of radiant energy is emitted. That discharge can last for hours.
Oh man, yeah. And once those seeds wear off, you're gonna lose most of your motor skills, and you're also gonna lose a significant amount of brain functionality for 72 hours, Morty. And I needed those seeds real bad, and I had to give them up just to get your parents off my back. So now we're gonna have to go get more. And then we're gonna go on even more adventures after that, Morty. And you're gonna keep your mouth shut about it, Morty. Because the world is full of idiots that don't understand what's important. And they'll tear us apart, Morty. But if you stick with me, I'm going to accomplish great things, Morty. And you're going to be part of them. And together we're going to run around, Morty. We're going to do all kinds of wonderful things, Morty. Just you and me, Morty. The outside world is our enemy, Morty. We're the only friends we've got, Morty. It's just Rick and Morty. Rick and Morty and their adventures, Morty. Rick and Morty forever, 100 years. Rick and Morty things. Me and Rick and Morty running around in Rick and Morty time. All day long, forever. All 100 days. Rick and Morty forever, 100 times. Over and over, Rick and Morty Adventures.com, www.rickandmorty.com, www.rickandmortyadventures, all 100 years, every minute, rickandmorty.com, www.100times, rickandmorty.com.
Using magnetic fields as a driver, as a cause of things in space. And as one noted astrophysicist here in Canberra once said, when we don't understand something, we blame it on magnetism. But of course, there is no good explanation for the magnetism. In the case of the sun, the source is buried out of sight where you can't check what's going on. And those attempts to check what is going on beneath the surface in the form of helioseismology, that is motion of the material just beneath the surface of the sun, showed that the movement of the material is about 100 times too small to generate the magnetic fields that we observe on the surface of the sun. But it seems that the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing in our highly specialized sciences. And also there is a tendency to assume that those people have got something wrong and that the answer will be discovered which suits your own ideas sometime in the near future. But all of the evidence is pointing to the fact that the sun does not have enough internal activity to generate the magnetic fields, and these magnetic fields, therefore, must be generated from outside the sun. The very fact that they wave is also indicative of the fact that they are associated with helical Birkeland currents, which naturally cause a waving magnetic field. The scientists in this particular article point out that they have a problem yet to solve, and that is, how do you dump the energy in this very rarefied corona? Because if 90% of the heating comes from this magnetic field activity, how exactly does the magnetic field interact with this very rarefied matter in the solar corona to produce those temperatures? And there's no good answer to that. However, in the electric universe model, Donald Scott has shown that the standard plasma physics explanation works quite well. And that is that in a discharge, in an electric discharge above the sun, you'll get what is called a double layer. And a double layer is a region where there's an electric field across a fairly short distance, in this case the corona, which can accelerate particles to high energies. And these particles, when they encounter matter, excite it. They excite it to high temperatures. And this, of course, is what we see. So the magnetic field is not a cause, it's an effect. It's an effect of the electric currents that generate the double layers, which accelerate the particles, which gives them the appearance of being hot. So these two scientists have said that they are studying the coronal hole regions of the sun. That's where the magnetic field lines are simplest. They come away from the sun and they enter interplanetary space. And so they have a fairly simple structure. Now, the electrical model points out that the coronal holes are the regions where the particles are accelerated away from the sun electrically.
You got a piece of it. That is not mine.
And appear to be cooler. Or the apparent temperature, and appear to be cooler simply because they are not colliding so much with surrounding matter, and therefore the apparent temperature is lowest, and yet their velocity is highest. So this is one of the other conundrums which is not explained by any magnetic model, but is explained by the electrical model.
Although shocking discoveries not predicted by solar physicists continue to this day, the standard model of the sun has remained essentially unchanged for well over half a century.
The whole problem arises when you are fixated on a theory of how the sun works, which is a century old, and is based around the belief that stars are isolated in space. In fact, that's the way they appear. But once you assume that, then you have to find an energy source within a star. The electric universe model points out, and it's supported by radio astronomy observations, that stars are connected by current filaments and therefore are at the focus of an electric discharge, so that all of the phenomena that we see above the sun are easily explained, as are all the phenomena on the sun. It's a simple, single theory which has had no exceptions.
For continuous updates on space news from the electric universe. Welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info. Astronomers working with the Hubble Space Telescope are expressing their complete bafflement over a recently observed asteroid's behavior. The asteroid P2013 P5 has astonished scientists with an unprecedented display of 6 comet-like tails. Adding further astonishment, the astronomers observed that the object's tail structures dramatically changed over just 13 days. Lead investigator David Jewett states, "We were literally dumbfounded when we saw it. Even more amazing, its tail structures changed dramatically in just 13 days as it belches out dust. That also caught us by surprise. It's hard to believe we're looking at an asteroid." The investigators suggest that an increase in the asteroid's rotation rate could be causing material to fly off from its surface, somehow creating the astonishing comet-like tails. However, to proponents of the electric universe, a more fundamental reconsideration of theory is now required.
The standard explanation of the asteroid P2013 P5's dust tails is that it must be spinning fast enough to remove material from its surface. This sounds pretty far-fetched because there's no real answer as to why it should be ejecting dust now and not at some earlier times, or not continuously. This requires other ad hocery in terms of material being knocked off it, bumped into, all of this kind of things. And then, of course, these tails are supposed to have been stretched out by radiation pressure from the sun. But we have seen images from the Hubble Space Telescope of fine filamentary tails, up to 6 of them, from this particular asteroid. How exactly does pressure from the sun produce these fine filaments? You'd expect it would tend to disperse it like smoke in the wind. This news story is based on the assumed differences between comets and asteroids. And so it's not surprising to me that the astronomers were dumbfounded when they saw cometary behavior from an asteroid, because the traditional story is that comets are formed from the same materials that formed the sun and the planets from a cloud of dust and gas. The asteroids, on the other hand, are supposed to be shattered planetesimals, that is, planets that were being gradually accumulated from this dust and gas, which collided with other objects of the same kind and which were then shattered into pieces. And so the asteroids are often called minor planets because some of them are quite large, but they also range right down to the size of comets. Now, the difference between the electrical model of the origins of comets and asteroids is it's a much simpler story. the standard story really has been disconfirmed or negated by the evidence that's been accumulated in the space age. But that is never acknowledged. Always the idea is that even though you may be dumbfounded by the observations, you always go back to that original story of the formation of the solar system. Everyone's seen that on television. You see the great cloud of dust and gas with minor objects, meteoroids and asteroidal bodies floating around in space, but nobody has been able to show how you turn that from a disk of dust and rubbish into a small number of large planets isolated by vast distances in space in the solar system. The electric universe model is very much simpler. It's almost biological in its overtones, and that is that stars and large gas giants are formed in what could be termed a cosmic lightning bolt in a dusty cloud.
The electric universe theory states that comets, asteroids, and meteors were electrically machined from planetary surfaces in the relatively recent past. Comets and asteroids thus have similar physical compositions, and the electrical theory of comets is the key to understanding the occasional cometary displays from asteroids.
The electrical model of comets has said for decades that there is no real distinction between asteroids and comets. And here we have an asteroid that has now officially been renamed as a comet. In the astrophysical journal Letters, it is now dubbed the Main Belt Comet P2013 P5. It's been known for decades that asteroids occasionally show cometary features. For instance, Chiron, which is quite a large asteroid, has on occasion shown a coma. That is, a glowing shell around it, rather like the coma of a comet. And occasionally we have seen minor dusty tails. But the point is, I think that astronomers are dumbfounded by this new asteroid simply because the question of why asteroids should show cometary features in the outer solar system has never been answered, or it hasn't been questioned enough to even begin to provide an answer. In the electric universe model, an asteroid in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter will, over a period of time, achieve the same electrical potential as the plasma that it's moving through. Now, if that asteroid has a rather cometary orbit, that is, that it swings between an orbit out towards Jupiter and one in towards the Earth, that asteroid will encounter a different electrical potential as it moves over that vast distance. The Hubble Space Telescope has been trained on this particular asteroid, and it has found, according to the astronomers, an even more amazing thing, that its tail structures have changed dramatically in just 13 days. This is the kind of thing that comets do. So the question is, why is there this distinction between asteroids and comets? The only real distinction is the form of their orbits. Comets sweep in close to the sun and out again to the outer reaches of the solar system. Asteroids don't move a great deal between the outer reaches and the inner reaches of the solar system. That's the only real difference. And the fact that the comets have such a display and that asteroids don't is merely down to the fact that the sun is a charged object in the solar system, and an asteroid or a comet approaching it rapidly will encounter a change in the electrical environment such that it will begin to discharge.
It is a long-held position of the electric universe that asteroids on an elliptical orbit that brings them close to the sun will be likely to display comet-like characteristics, like the recent asteroid 3200 Phaethon, which approached the sun to a distance less than 15 solar diameters and produced unexpected brightening and a 250,000 kilometer dust tail in a single day. However, this does not apply to the asteroid/comet P2013 P5 because its orbital eccentricity is minimal. But irrespective of an asteroid's orbital eccentricity, it will move through an environment of varying electrical conditions with the potential to affect its behavior.
Back in the 1980s, the arrival of asteroid 2201 Olyato inside the orbit of Venus heralded a flurry of magnetic activity. Now, Dr. Christopher Russell, who presented this information at a European Planetary Science Congress, pointed out that each time this asteroid passes between the Sun and Venus, there are marked increases in unusual magnetic peaks known as interplanetary field enhancements. Now, Sudden increase in magnetic field and field changes are typical of the tails of comets. In other words, what we're looking at here is electric current filaments between the asteroid and the planet Venus. Now, these kinds of things have also been discovered between Venus and the Earth, so it stretches over that distance as well. And that at that time, the plasma effects were called stringy things because scientists do not recognize current filaments in space plasma. Some comets have had their tails detected by spacecraft stretching right across the solar system. So here we have another effect other than just the orbital motion of a body towards and away from the sun that can have an electrical impact on some other body in the solar system. In the case of Mars, for instance, when Mars is in a line behind the Earth from the sun, there are electrical effects which can cause global dust storms. And also another phenomenon that's been known for a very long time, known as the blue clearing on Mars, where Mars observed through a blue filter. Suddenly you can see the surface features when Mars is behind the Earth, shielded from the sun. So when you get an asteroid like P2013 P5 with an orbit which is outside Mars and doesn't approach much closer than the Martian orbit, the fact that it's displaying cometary-like features is not so surprising because these electrical disturbances can be created by other bodies between the sun and the asteroid, and they can be created by the sun itself, as we have sometimes seen with comets flaring up even beyond Saturn's orbit. This latest story points out the problems we humans have in doing science. The scientific method is a set of ideals, a dispassionate search for the truth, which is rarely, if ever, achieved. The fact is that we humans are better storytellers than we are scientists. The stories that we are taught when young are very difficult to shift, and we cling to them sometimes with such ferocity that people are prepared to go to war over differences in these stories. And unfortunately, it does seem that science does not progress as rapidly as it might if the ideals of the scientific method were adhered to.
For continuous updates on space news from the electric universe, stay tuned to thunderbolts.info. Welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info. Astronomers today are puzzling over the unexpected brightening of a recently discovered comet. On October 20th, an observer in Japan. Welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project. Welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info. A team of astronomers has recently discovered what they describe as giant X-ray emitting plasma arms stretching from the nearby Coma galaxy cluster. These bright plasma arms are said to be nearly 500,000 light-years long and connect from the center of the Coma cluster to a subgroup of galaxies. Astronomers estimate the plasma arms age at 300 million years. This discovery contradicts astronomers' expectation that the Coma cluster's core should be highly turbulent. The lead author of the study states, "The cluster should be a messy place with lots of turbulent motion taking place in the intercluster medium, but we see relatively straight, long-lasting streams that remain intact for several 100 million years." Let us look more closely at the Coma galaxy cluster from the electric universe perspective.
The astronomer Halton Arp, who has been dubbed by those who have followed his work as the modern Galileo, has written in his book Seeing Red, which was published in 1998, the following information about the Coma cluster of galaxies. He writes, "The Coma cluster represents the densest, most conspicuous aggregate of galaxies in the sky, and has long been taken as the prototype medium-distant galaxy cluster. The astronomer Sinclair Smith was one of the first astronomers to calculate under the assumption that the redshifts were velocities in equilibrium, that is, they responded to gravity, that the mass of the cluster far exceeded the mass of the galaxies comprising it. This is to keep those apparently fast-moving galaxies in place or as part of the cluster. The noted astronomer Fritz Zwicky later emphasized this discrepancy, and so was born the concept of dark or missing mass. This observationally undetected but crucial repair to the theory had to be invented to save the redshift equals velocity assumption." Eventually it became so needed that today we have a universe which is reported to be about 90% unobservable. That is, dark matter makes up far more than 90% of the visible universe. It strikes me that astronomers and scientists and students looking back at the science of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century in total disbelief. This invention of dark matter to save a preconceived idea of what redshift was all about seems quite incredible. It's more incredible than the flat Earth theory or the theory that the Earth was the center of the universe. This notion that the Coma cluster is turbulent arises from this misinterpretation of redshift, which gives high velocities to some of the objects within that cluster. But if you look at Halton Arp's powerful research, which shows that redshift is related to the youthfulness of an object, you realize that a lot of these velocities are imaginary. They've got nothing to do with what's actually going on. The system is not as turbulent as the mistaken theories of modern astrophysics have led astronomers to believe.
The astronomers compare these plasma arms to the trail of a smoke flare or the contrail of a jet aircraft. But are such analogies valid in discussions of plasma behavior in space?
The researchers say that these arms were most likely formed when smaller galaxy clusters had their gas stripped away by the headwind created by the motion of the cluster through the hot gas. All of this idea of headwinds and blasts of hot gas and so on have nothing to do with plasma physics. What we're talking about here is the material that makes up 99.9% of the visible universe, that is plasma, which is electrically charged and does not behave like winds or contrails of jets. It is said in the article that most theoretical models expect that mergers between clusters like those in Coma will produce strong turbulence, like ocean water that has been churned by many passing ships. Here we go with the mechanical analog instead of the electrical. Instead, the smooth shape of these lengthy arms points to a rather calm setting for the hot gas in the Coma cluster.
Tonight,
even
I'd
after
like to
many
tell you about
mergers.
one of the big questions.
The
in
researchers
science.
go on to say
It's
that
a question that goes
magnetic
back
fields are
at
likely
least
responsible for the small
2,500
amount of
years.
turbulence that is present in Coma. This reminds me of something that was said at a public meeting by a leading astrophysicist, that when we don't understand something in space, we blame it on magnetism, because there is no explanation for these mysterious magnetic fields in this kind of model. The electric universe, of course, shows that electric currents flowing in plasma will generate a magnetic field, and the magnetic field, in fact, is the very thing that maintains this so-called hot gas in long linear structures. Without that, a hot gas in a vacuum will just dissipate rapidly.
Astronomers' observations of the Coma cluster may support the electric universe theory that electrical currents supply the high-energy radiation emitted by galaxy clusters.
The article that we're discussing here should be viewed in terms of Halton Arp's assessment, because he writes, the Coma cluster confirms in general and in detail what we have learned about clusters of galaxies. Instead of being old, quiescent systems, they are filled with high-energy radiation that requires resupply. They show strong evidence for recent ejection of higher redshift matter. They have large components of intrinsic redshift. Intrinsic redshift, note. They are small, low luminosity, and are associated with older, more nearby galaxies. You will note he mentions that the high-energy radiation of these galactic clusters requires resupply. And the question there is, what's this resupply? How is it achieved? And of course, the electric universe fills that particular gap by suggesting that these arms of hot gas, as they're called, are actually electrical connections between these objects. The low redshift galaxies give birth to high redshift objects, and they're connected by electrical arms which appear to be hot, but of course multi-million degrees in terms of temperature is only a few hundred volts in electrical terms. So all this falls into a natural, simple explanation in the electric universe.
For continuous updates on space news from the electric universe, stay tuned to thunderbolts.info. Welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info. One of the most remarkable types of objects observed in space is the bipolar planetary nebula. Today, a team of scientists is reporting an astonishing discovery. The axes of bipolar nebulae within the Milky Way's central bulge are aligned perpendicular to the plane of the galaxy. The lead author of the study states, "This really is a surprising find, and if it holds true, a very important one. The alignment we're seeing for these bipolar nebulae indicates something bizarre about star systems within the central bulge. What does this discovery tell us about the nature of planetary nebulae?"
We've all seen those beautiful images of planetary nebulae, the hourglass-shaped objects that have been seen and photographed very successfully through the Hubble Space Telescope and other large new telescopes. The more detail that's seen, of course, the more puzzles have arisen. But the greatest puzzle of all has just arrived in the news that it's been discovered that these hourglass shapes in the central bulge of our galaxy all have, if you like, the stems of the hourglass all facing in the plane of the galaxy. And this is not to be expected if these shapes are caused by the star itself and any objects that happen to be orbiting that star. The surprise for astronomers is that there should be any connection at all between these isolated objects. The other great puzzle is that the expected axis of rotation of stars tends to be in the plane of the cloud of material from which it's formed. This is the standard model of how stars formed and how planetary systems are formed about that star. It's the rotation of the cloud of material that gives it its axis of rotation. But here we're looking at planetary nebulae close into the center of the galaxy and which have their rotation axis perpendicular to the cloud, which is totally at odds with any idea of the formation of the stars from such a cloud. All of this goes to show the inability of astronomers to predict or explain new discoveries in space. The explanations themselves that we see in these reports are in a language that, from the electric universe point of view, is all wrong. Planetary nebulae are supposed to have been formed by dying stars and stars puffing outer layers off in that process. But according to the electric universe model, the so-called life and death of stars is a complete fiction. A planetary nebula is simply a star in which we can see the electrical circuitry of that star. It's being lit by the galaxy. And therefore, you might expect also that the alignment of that electric current towards the center of the galaxy would be along the arms of the spiral. And this would also explain this strange discovery that the planetary nebulae have their axes aligned perpendicular to the plane of the galaxy. This is to be expected in the electric universe model. It's totally unexpected in the old, centuries-old gravitational model of the formation of stars and their planets.
Scientists now speculate that the magnetic field of the Milky Way's central bulge might somehow be causing the mysterious alignment. However, why this magnetic field exists remains a mystery in the standard model.
This new finding about planetary nebulae near the center of the galaxy hints at another more mysterious factor. According to the report, along with these complex stellar characteristics of those of our Milky Way, the whole central bulge of the galaxy rotates around the galactic center. This bulge may have a greater influence than previously thought over our entire galaxy via its magnetic fields. Well, this isn't an explanation in the standard model because there is no explanation of the magnetic fields. Whereas in the electric universe model, which follows plasma cosmology, the magnetic fields are the result of electric currents flowing through the galaxy towards the center, so that it all fits together and is easily explained by the electric universe model. Currently, it has no explanation based on the gravitational and mysterious magnetic model favored by astronomers. This comes down to our education systems, and it could be said that the model of the galaxy and stars is a century or more old. And when those ideas were put forward, there was no understanding at all of plasma. Plasma physics was in its infancy when the model of the sun was put forward. There's a huge gap in understanding, and this is being perpetuated by the education systems, which does not look at any alternative models, despite...
Welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info. A new paper published by an MIT physicist claims to theoretically prove that so-called quantum entanglement, or two particles each seemingly occupying multiple states simultaneously, gives rise to a wormhole which allows particles to communicate through a so-called gravitational tunnel. This theory follows from a paper published earlier this year, which suggests that when two black holes become entangled, then are pulled apart, a wormhole is created which connects the black holes. The reasoning in these papers follows from a purely mathematical approach to physics and cosmology. In this two-part presentation, physicist Wal Thornhill examines just how reliable this approach is at describing how the universe actually works.
A glaring example of the irrational is to be seen in a recent Science Daily report titled, "You Can't Get Entangled Without a Wormhole," which refers to papers by Julian Sonner, a senior postdoc in MIT's Lab for Nuclear Science and Center for Theoretical Physics, and a related paper by Kristen Jensen of the University of Victoria and Andreas Karsch of the University of Washington. The article says that essentially, entanglement involves two particles, each occupying multiple states at once, a condition referred to as superposition. For example, both particles may simultaneously spin clockwise and counterclockwise, but neither has a definite state until one is measured, causing the other particle to instantly assume a corresponding state. The resulting correlations between the particles are preserved even if they reside on opposite ends of the universe. End of quote. Now, the word entanglement is a euphemism to hide the fact that the physical connection is unknown. So all that follows isn't physics, it's mystification. The indeterminacy of states also means we are not dealing with physics, which relies on being able to determine the state of the system being observed. From a real physicist's point of view, the most telling experimental fact is that the connection between two entangled particles is instantaneous, even if they reside on opposite ends of the universe. So the article asks the question, but what enables particles to communicate instantaneously and seemingly faster than the speed of light over such distances? The simple classical physics answer is that the connection between the two particles is not via a slow transverse electromagnetic wave. Instead, it's the same kind of connection that we observe between the planets and the sun. That is, gravity. Newton's law of gravity does not include time. The force of gravity acts instantaneously. Now, the electric universe explains that gravity itself is a form of the electric force that operates upon neutral bodies by distorting the subatomic charged particles within those bodies to form tiny, weak electric dipoles. This simple model explains why gravity is such a weak force, because subatomic particles are infinitesimally small, and also why you can't easily shield from gravity, because all of the subatomic particles participate, whether it's a conductor or a non-conductor, whatever it's made from. Importantly, though, gravity on the cosmic scale allows us to see that the direct electric force between particles operates instantly. The spookiness and non-locality of quantum phenomena can be understood both physically and in meaningful language. Entanglement, then, is simply an electrical resonance between two subatomic particles, each comprised of an identical resonance system of orbiting charged subparticles. In other words, it's a repeated pattern, like an atom within an atom. The instantaneous connection maintains the resonance or entanglement between the particles regardless of their relative movement or distance apart. Because the connection is instantaneous, there is no Doppler shift detuning or anything like that. The two particles remain in communication. This model that separates the phenomenon of electromagnetic waves in a medium from the direct longitudinal connection between all matter in the universe, that is the electrical connection, opens up new insights for physicists. For example, physicists attempt to isolate their experiment from outside influences, including the observer. But in our electric universe, there is no isolated system. The observer is a part of the experiment, whether he likes it or not, and as discovered in so-called weird quantum experiments. Contrast this simple explanation with the meaningless language of the report, and I quote, "Earlier this year, physicists proposed an answer in the form of wormholes or gravitational tunnels. The group showed that by creating two entangled black holes, then pulling them apart, they formed a wormhole, essentially a shortcut through the universe, connecting the distant black holes. Now, black holes are a mathematical mistake equivalent to the school mathematics howler of dividing by zero to get infinity. Gravity is weaker than the electric force by a factor of 1,000
Okay.
billion,
The reason I'm filming
billion,
with this with a
billion
point and
times.
shoot.
Now that's as close to zero as you can get. So using gravity to explain the concentrated energy sources observed at the centers of galaxies and calling them black holes is bound to give you answers that make no physical
Instead of a
sense.
DSLR, I don't want to ruin the sensor.
Wormholes are
Now,
a
I use the
geometric
black
construct
background for
in more than three
contrast. Let me see if I
dimensions,
can
so
get
they
better
have nothing to
contrast
do
by
with the
turning
real
the lights
space
off.
that.
Now, I'm only using a single slit for this. The notion of wave-particle duality and the double slit experiment is bogus. What people don't realize is why does light actually bend around a corner? Well, I'll explain that in the second video. And let me lift up the black contrast card here. What I'm actually doing, now here you can see it really well. Last video I couldn't get it. Do you see that? Perfect interference fringes. Now, this isn't the double slit experiment. You see that? Perfect, perfect double slit experiment. Now, I'll mention it in the other video as to why when the slit gets smaller, the fringes basically disappear. When the slit gets larger, the interference increases. This is simple interference. Has nothing to do with wave-particle duality BS at all. Now let me show you what I'm actually doing to film this. Let me turn on the light here and point it over. What I'm using is a precision laser pointer, not a junky laser pointer, but actually a precision one. They don't make them like that anymore. I'm passing it through the gap, a very thin gap of less than about a half a millimeter gap of two razor blades. Yes, that's right. Now the laser light is not going around either side of the slit. The entirety of the beam is confined by the width of the razor blade, which is about 2.5 millimeters. So it's only passing through the slit, okay? Only through the slit, okay? Double slit experiment, nonsense. Wave-particle duality, let me lift up this. Nonsense. Absolute nonsense, okay? We'll explain the nature of light in the upcoming videos, but Einsteinian and quantum mechanics explanation for actually everything is based upon the supposed physics of light, but light is a coaxial cable, okay? There is no such thing as a valid double slit experiment. Obviously, the observations are valid. It's just the explanations that are invalid. The same reason that idiot Einstein won a Nobel Peace Prize for the photoelectric effect. They were correct observations, but the explanation was totally wrong. Okay? Descriptions and observations can be highly 100% accurate. It's the explanations where people and human beings especially screw up. Einstein was a moron. The entire basis of wave-particle duality is nonsense. Light is a coaxial circuit, a longitudinal dielectric with transverse electrical and magnetic components, obviously. So we know about the transverse components of light. But what gives light increased capacitance with shorter wavelengths and the nature of light? Well, Tesla hinted at it. I've written about it in the free book, which is being expanded, Uncovering the Missing Secrets of Magnetism. Here you see perfect interference patterns. Why does light bend around corners? Okay, why? It's the same reason why magnets attract. It's the same reason why it was observed that light from a distant star was warping around the edge of the sun during a lunar eclipse. Dielectric acceleration, that which we call gravity, it's all electrical. It is all electrical.
Physicists, engineers, and you and I have to deal with. But the article continues. Now an MIT physicist has found that, looking through the lens of string theory, the creation of two entangled quarks, the building blocks of matter, simultaneously give rise to a wormhole connecting the pair. That's the end of the quote. But string theory is, according to Peter Voigt, not even wrong. The questions that need to be answered by this piece of whimsy are both endless and pointless. Pointless because no one knows what a quark is, nor how matter can warp space to form a hole across the universe, or even what that means, nor how that effect can be instantaneous. Space is merely a concept of location in 3 dimensions. How do you warp a concept? But the article goes on. The theoretical results bolster the relatively new and exciting idea that the laws of gravity holding together the universe may not be fundamental, but arise from something else, quantum entanglement. That's hardly a breakthrough when you don't understand quantum entanglement. You'll notice that modern physics is in the business of complicating things beyond comprehension, inventing new particles and forces in the hope of a Nobel Prize. It is not the way classical physics was done. Classical physics until the beginning of the 20th century was in the business of simplifying particles and forces. There was a strong intuitive feel on the part of leading scientists then that gravity is simply an electrical force of some description, like the forces between atoms that form our Earth and everything on it. That's the conclusion of the electric universe based on all the new evidence since then. The article says, of course, there appears to be a major barrier to reconciling quantum mechanics and general relativity. For years, physicists have tried to come up with a theory of quantum gravity to marry the two fields. You'll notice that the standard picture of a black hole or a gravitational object in space is represented as a funnel in space-time, usually with an object like, in the Earth's case, the moon perched on the edge of the funnel. The idea being that the moon, instead of traversing a straight line in space, follows the curve of the funnel. However, the very image itself gives a false picture because we just assume that this gravitational well or funnel has gravity pulling from underneath to draw the object down into the funnel. But this is using gravity to explain gravity. It's a circular argument, and the image is quite misleading. An object perched on the surface of this funnel, if gravity were not pulling it down, would remain fixed on that funnel. It would have no force tending to move it downwards or sideways or upwards. It would remain exactly where it is. But it's plain to see that general relativity never explained gravity. It merely describes its effect in a geometry that has no reality. And quantum mechanics is a recipe book with no understanding of the ingredients or how they interact. As a result, the rest of the article is appalling nonsense headlined, "Tunneling to the Fifth Dimension." It's only necessary to highlight the meaningless language to show the ideas expressed are imaginary. For example, two entangled black holes forgets that the mathematics of black hole theory allows only a single black hole in an empty universe. The Newtonian principle of superposition of gravitating objects doesn't apply to general relativity. There can never be a second black hole to get entangled. The theorists invoke a wormhole, a tunnel through space-time, produced by pulling two black holes apart. Hyphenating the words space and time to produce a fourth dimension is physically meaningless. Mathematicians use the word dimension to mean a degree of freedom in their equations. There are only three physical dimensions in space, which are measured by length and direction. Time has no length or direction. You can't point in the direction of time. Time has no arrow. Joining space and time has no physical significance. So you cannot produce physical wormholes in space. It is pure science fiction. One of the authors, Sonner, applied this thinking to quarks, the theoretical subatomic building blocks of matter. And I quote, "To see what emerges from two entangled quarks, he first generated quarks using the Schwinger effect."
I'm not talking about what you guys are talking about.
Theory that enables one to create particles out of
yeah,
nothing.
yeah, I was talking about a
Here we
lot of
see
shit to see
mathematicians
through, like
resorting
10
to dismissal of a principle of
39th
physics
power
that you cannot perform a creation miracle.
being that that's
It's
the
not
fractal,
scientific. The author Douglas
scalable
Adams in
fractal
Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy parodied this sleight
ratio
of
of
hand
plasma.
mercilessly when Zaphod Beeblebrock used an infinite improbability drive to rescue Ford Prefect and Arthur Dent in deep space. Particle physicists have been using the infinite improbability principle since the inception of quantum theory. As is well known, Einstein hated the idea. He's reported to have said, "God doesn't throw dice."
Okay, cool.
He was right. As soon as you disconnect cause from effect, you are not doing science. Another quote from the article, Sonner mapped the entangled quarks onto a four-dimensional space, considered a
Welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info. 2016 may be remembered as the year that the hypothesis of dark matter was finally, officially falsified. Two recent scientific studies report findings that may raise fatal objections to dark matter's existence. In this episode, Our guest, Barry Setterfield, begins our analysis with an overview of the origins of the dark matter hypothesis and the significance of these new scientific reports from the electric universe perspective.
Both of these studies involve the role of so-called dark matter in maintaining the observed rotation rates of galaxies. It's these galaxy rotation rates which cause the whole idea of dark matter to be introduced in the first place. This is because the outside spiral arms of galaxies were rotating as fast around the inner core as the insides of the spiral arms were. Gravitationally, it was expected that the stars in the outer arms would be rotating much more slowly, just like our planets, outside planets rotate more slowly around the sun than the inside planets do. Because galaxies don't do that, the gravitational action of dark matter was invoked. But both articles show that dark matter was not behaving as predicted. One professor of astronomy independently concluded about the September research article regarding the rotation rates of galaxies that, and I quote, "Nothing in the standard cosmological model predicts this result, and it is almost impossible to imagine how that model could be modified to explain it without the discarding the dark matter hypothesis completely," end quote. More recently, one of the authors of the November article, Paolo Salucci, concluded that their results, quote, "make it clear to scientists that there is another sort of physics yet to be discovered and explored," end quote. So these two articles suggest that the dark matter idea might have to be questioned, or perhaps a new sort of physics awaits discovery, or both.
For historical context, let us explore why scientists first proposed the existence of dark matter.
When Sir Isaac Newton mathematically encapsulated the way that massive bodies behave under the influence of gravity, it allowed the behavior of all objects in the solar system to be described exactly. Ever since, astronomers have been using those equations in order to explain the behavior of everything that we see in the whole universe, ranging from comets to galaxy clusters. The rate at which the individual planets circle the sun was neatly described by Newton's laws and was shown to be reliable over many years. By way of illustration, a planetarium uses these gravitational laws to show what the solar system events occurred at a given time in the past or will occur at a given time in the future. Archaeologists rely on eclipse information based on these gravitational laws to date historical events. In essence, Newton's law stated that the further away an orbiting body is from the central object that it's orbiting, the slower it's going to travel. So the planet closest to the sun, Mercury, has an orbital speed around the sun of about 30 miles a second. In contrast, our Earth, the third rock from the sun, travels at a speed of about 18 3/4 miles per second, while the tiny and distant Pluto only travels at 3 miles per second. If the law of gravity was being followed, it was expected that the rotation or orbit speeds of stars around the nucleus of their parent galaxy should fall off in a very similar way to the planets around the sun. In the late 1970s, Vera Rubin and Albert Bosma independently discovered something unusual about the way that galaxies rotate. They didn't behave the way that gravitational laws said they should. Instead, what was found was that outside the region of the core of the galaxy, the speed of stars in their orbits was approximately the same all the way to the galaxy's outer edge. There was no slowing, no drop-off in the orbit speed. Once this fact had been fully established for many galaxies, the necessity for an explanation became obvious. And it's in this context that the dark matter concept actually developed. Newtonian gravity did not predict these observational results, so obviously something was not being taken into account. If these flat rotation curves, as they...
I gotta say, when you take a real look at standard cosmology, it's faltering. I mean, it's broken. I mean, if you take these things into consideration, which most people don't even know, the particulars of any of these things, and they whatever, and a lot of people don't care, but some people care and they still don't know. And they continue to support dogmatic theories that defy all observation through groupthink and group affirmation and just sheer, something. I don't know. I don't want to be rude, but, sheer stuff.
They called were to be explained by gravitational action alone, then it was only possible if there was a huge amount of matter in an immense halo around the entire visible galaxy and beyond. This huge halo had to extend way beyond the stars that made up the visible edge of the galaxy for the proposition to work. And since this halo of material was not visible and didn't appear to emit any light, it eventually came to be called dark matter. It was important to note that on this explanation, the dark matter had to interact with ordinary matter gravitationally, otherwise the proposition wouldn't work. In November of 2016, Dr. Andreas Ringwald defined dark matter in this way, quote, "Dark matter is an invisible form of matter which, until now, has only revealed itself through its gravitational effects. What it consists of remains a complete mystery. Although it still remains a mystery, various forms of dark matter have been proposed nonetheless, such as hot dark matter, like plasma, cold dark matter, like cold hydrogen gas, massive compact halo objects, which have been given the acronym MACHOs, M-A-C-H-O, massive compact halo objects like swarms of planet or moon-sized objects wandering aimlessly throughout the galaxy. Extensive observations have definitely ruled out all three of those particular options. Furthermore, by late October of 2013, studies by the Kepler Space Telescope had also ruled out any possibility of dark matter being made up of black holes of any size. The possibility of it being in the form of strange or exotic matter was proposed in November of 2014, but that was because of the unsuccessful search for a likely candidate. But this is currently considered quite unlikely as a candidate for dark matter. The current favourite explanation lies with WIMPs. WIMPs is another acronym, and they are proposed to be weakly interacting massive particles, something like neutrinos. In recent scientific history, much time, money and research effort has been expended in looking for WIMPs, and they appear to be the only possible explanation which is left. But WIMPs in the form of neutrinos and a slew of other possible particles have all been ruled out by experiment and observation. It was hoped that the Large Hadron Collider at CERN was going to discover the key elusive dark matter particle that could be labelled as the WIMP.
If WIMPs are proposed as the dark matter component, is it true that these two studies call into question whether it would interact gravitationally with ordinary matter as expected?
Yes, they do call this into question. Ekaterina Karoukas, the lead author of the November paper, put it this way, and I quote, "Most dark matter, according to the most credible hypotheses, would be WIMPs. It would not interact with ordinary matter except through gravitational force. Our observations, however, disagree with this notion. If that is the case, then the original proposition about dark matter is false, since it was expected that it would interact with matter via gravity and so govern the galaxy rotation rate. The November study actually goes further. It shows that the distribution of matter and dark matter must be closely related if dark matter is really there. The authors state, and I quote, "We found a link between the structure of ordinary or luminous matter like stars, dust and gas with dark matter." In other words, these observations show that if dark matter really does exist, it can only be in those locations where ordinary matter is present. It means that there cannot be a massive halo of dark matter extending beyond the visible limits of galaxies. The reason, according to that study, is that those visible limits mark where ordinary matter comes to an end. and so any dark matter must end there as well. In fact, in February of 2015, a specific search for dark matter halos beyond the visible limits to galaxies gave a negative result for the galaxies that were specifically studied for such an effect. So the conclusion is that dark matter can only occur in those locations where ordinary matter is found, not on its own or elsewhere. This negates the whole idea of dark matter halos existing at all. The September 2016 paper came to similar conclusions using a sample of 2,693 data points in 153 galaxies. David Merritt, a professor of physics and astronomy at Rochester Institute of Technology, who didn't take part in either study, but came to these conclusions from these scientific papers. He said, and I quote, "Galaxy rotation curves have traditionally been explained via an ad hoc hypothesis that galaxies are surrounded by dark matter. The relation or law discovered by Magor et al. Is a serious and possibly fatal challenge to this hypothesis, since it shows that rotation curves are precisely determined by the distribution of normal matter alone. Nothing in the standard cosmological model predicts this, and it's almost impossible to imagine how that model could be modified to explain it without discarding the dark matter hypothesis completely." The September 2016 paper determined that there was a precise mathematical relationship between the visible matter present and the acceleration that stars and galaxies undergo. It's an almost exact relationship or law, with very little room for error in galaxies of all varieties. The source of the acceleration or force is not identified, except that it is not normal gravity. The paper's lead author, Stacey Magor, said, and I quote, "The natural inference is that this law stems from a universal force, such as a modification of gravity, like MOND," that's M-O-N-D, an acronym again, the hypothesis of modified Newtonian dynamics proposed by Israeli physicist Moti Milgrom. The MOND approach by Milgrom actually tries to explain the rotation curves by adding a small acceleration term to the normal Newtonian gravitational equations. This term has little effect on small scales, such as in our solar system, but it becomes effective on the larger scale of galaxies. While other gravitational phenomena cannot be accounted for by the MOND proposal, Magor's study does not discount the validity of Milgrom's approach. In fact, it is in line with it, but MOND, and here's the problem, is a purely mathematical device that gives us the right answer to some observations. That is the problem. It is only a mathematical device. There is no actual physical reason for the additional term or the new law. This in itself might caution us that we should look at other options where other accelerating forces exist apart from gravity.
An alternative candidate for an accelerating force is electromagnetism. Why has this possibility been largely ignored by mainstream cosmology?
There is, in fact, a historical reason that it's been largely ignored until recently. If you can bear with me for a few moments while we trace this through and see what happened. In the earliest years of the 20th century, a Norwegian, Christian Birkeland, was studying the behavior of plasmas in the lab. Plasma, the fourth state of matter, is created in the lab when atoms are stripped off one or more electrons, leaving protons, ions, and electrons, that is, charged particles, and they wander freely around. Moving charges like this constitute an electric current, and these currents have a circling magnetic field. These magnetic fields constrain the plasma to form filaments and sheets. So all the interactions of plasma are electric and magnetic. Birkeland's work in the early 1900s was the beginning of something known as plasma physics. However, almost immediately, a mathematician and physicist, Sidney Chapman, well respected for his work, decried Birkeland's plasma physics. His opinions were so respected that they blocked the progress of plasma physics until Chapman's death in 1970. Since then, new discoveries in space have confirmed that Birkeland was right and Chapman was wrong. As a result, plasma physics has become much more widely studied. What has been found is that over 99% of the material in the universe exists in a plasma form. So studying how plasma filaments behave in the lab can give us some clues as to what's going on in space. So from this history, it can be seen that the option of electromagnetic forces and plasma physics had barely emerged in the late 1970s and early 1980s when this galaxy problem surfaced. So gravitational phenomena alone were considered as the only option. It is in this context that Anthony Peratt of Los Alamos National Laboratories pointed out in 1992 that the electromagnetic force can be up to 10 to the 39 times stronger than gravity out in space. 10 to the 39, that's 1 followed by 39 zeros. His experiments and simulations show that the answer to the dark matter dilemma lies along this line of investigation. In a series of articles in the IEEE Journal for December of 1986, Peratt discussed his experiments and computer simulations with intertwining plasma filaments acting under the forces of electricity and magnetism. He pointed out that at the cross-section of interaction between these filaments, miniature spiral galaxies were formed. These galaxies actually included all known types. The number of interacting filaments he used ranged from up to 12 experiments to 6 in simulations. When using just 2 or 3 filaments, galaxies of all types were formed by their electromagnetic interaction. Peratt pointed out that these lab experiments and their results can be linearly upscaled to cosmic proportions as a result of known plasma behavior. Thus, the key candidate for an accelerating force in galaxies is electricity and or magnetism, which for historical reasons has been largely ignored by gravitational astronomers up until now. For this present discussion, one important point emerges from these experiments of Peratt. These lab-generated miniature galaxies, whether spiral or elliptical or whatever form they took, all had rotation curves which are exact replicas of their cosmic counterparts. The flat rotation curves resulted because galaxies were not acting under gravitational forces, but were rather controlled by electromagnetic interactions, which act in a different way, as well as being much faster and stronger than gravity. Thus, the forces involved in plasma interactions alone are capable of producing flat rotation curves in galaxies without any extra mathematical terms or exotic physics or the necessity for dark matter. Peratt's research therefore deserves much wider publicity among astronomers, physicists and cosmologists than it has received up to now. So too does the answer to dark matter conundrum that he found from plasma physics to be reproducible by experiments in the lab. So it's a complete solution to this puzzle, and what is more, it's reliable science.
For continuous updates on space news from the electric universe, stay tuned to thunderbolts.info.
You guys hear me coughing? I forgot.
Oh, Amy, does a fish sandwich sound good? Probably not, huh? Never mind. Too many onions. I just thought about that. Maybe if you hurry up and get home and go for a walk. No, I want to walk up there. I don't want to drink the shake. Maybe stop by Roy's. Do a little weed share. So I gotta talk to
Welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project
Johnny
at thunderbolts.info.
something too. A little swap,
2016 was another exciting year in space discovery. Like every other year in recent memory, major surprises dominated science headlines. From the detection of X-rays from Pluto, to the possible falsification of the hypothesis of dark matter. However, science media also declared some victories for the standard cosmology, most notably the purported detection of gravitational waves. In this episode, the Thunderbolts project's chief science advisor, physicist Wal Thornhill, offers a perspective on the current state of science and the electric universe as we enter 2017.
What you doing, man?
On every New Year's Day, I wonder whether this will be the year the Thunderbolts project and the electric universe gain significant mainstream media attention.
Could have been easy.
I think 2017 offers the best opportunity yet.
Sail cat.
There are two reasons for saying this.
I don't like regular catfish.
Project,
I don't even like freshwater
to
catfish. I
human
like
nature.
sail cat.
Let's take the Sapphire
Saltwater
project first.
Not brackish.
Sapphire is an electrical
Saltwater.
experiment far more sophisticated
They
than the one
shrimp.
that Christian Birkeland carried out over a century ago,
They don't eat shit off the
in
bottom
which he
like
subjected a
regular catfish.
magnetized globe suspended in a vacuum chamber
That's
to
how you
electric
catch 'em.
discharges.
Shrimp.
He called it his Torella, or Little Earth. Birkeland discovered the foundations of the electric universe, but mathematical theorists who had no use for such a complicating factor as electricity ignored him.
I mean, it's better than carp, bone-wise, but I mean, it really ain't worth eating unless you like that taste. You'd have to like shoot one right in the head, so it wouldn't even know it was getting caught. You know what I mean? Because they release so much adrenaline, they're so stinky.
Birkeland's story by Lucy.
Like those damn blue. Good fish if you catch it just right and bleed it fast enough and all that kind of stuff. Otherwise, it's horrible. Horrible fish. It's the difference between a disgusting smell and a regular fish.
Jago, The Northern Lights, is well worth reading. So today you'll find no mention of electricity in any textbook on astronomy or astrophysics. It is a failing that ensures the 20th and early 21st century will be remembered only for its odd beliefs.
See? And this is the kind of stuff that, I mean, this literally should ring home to people because NASA is reporting the Alfvén wave, which is a kinetic wave in plasma, which proves that the plasma waves have capacitance, which means that there's charge potential differences between plasma. Those two plasma waves have the same fingerprint, right? There's going to be charge potentials between the two. So it's kind of funny that it's still being left out as a component when it's obviously detected, physics. It's detected. It's there. But let's just leave that out. It's like saying, okay, we have, we're a little bit overweight on our scale here, and we have, and in reality, everyone can see that there's an elephant on the scale. But we're just going to look around at all the other things and only count them and pretend like the elephant isn't even on the scale. But obviously it's on the scale because we can see it. But it can't be the issue. There must be something else that's weighing too much. We've counted everything except for the elephant. And we see the elephant, but we aren't counting the elephant. It's weird.
If Sapphire is successful, and all indications so far point that way, we will, for the first time in history, understand how the sun really works. And since the sun is our touchstone for understanding all other stars, such an understanding must revolutionize cosmology. Stars are not isolated nuclear campfires in the sky. Scientists a century ago, effectively in the horse and buggy era, grasped upon the recently discovered nuclear energy to explain how a star might keep shining for the eons required by the misguided gradualist theories of geologists. Sir Arthur Eddington invented a simplistic gravitating ball of gas model of the sun. But the sun is an almost perfect sphere, which is impossible if gravity shapes its rotating body. Particle physicists joined in the game and invented a complex and unverifiable sequence of nuclear reactions requiring that the centre of the sun be composed of the lightest gas, hydrogen. This profoundly unlikely condition has remained unquestioned despite the fact that almost every observable feature of the sun denies Eddington's model. And there is no feedback mechanism known that could control hydrogen fusion to within 0.1%, which is how steadily the sun shines. The hydrogen bomb model of star should have the night sky look like the 4th of July. So what if we don't understand the sun? Well, it changes everything. It means scientists are wasting billions of dollars trying to generate energy like the sun. It means the trillions of dollars spent on the Large Hadron Collider, on fusion research, on gravity waves, on astronomy and space research is largely wasted. The questions being asked are the wrong ones, and the data is being misinterpreted. The modern mysteries to be solved are not real. They are artifacts of the models. The computer models are incorrect. Big science today is a train wreck in slow motion. Big Bang cosmology is our atlas of the universe, depicting our place within it. But our cosmic atlas is little advanced beyond a medieval map. Instead of being centered on the Mediterranean, it has a geocentric perspective. Experiments on Earth become consecrated as universal laws and universal constants. The universal law of gravity, for example, has unexplored regions populated by monstrous black holes which swallow all that comes near. It has an edge beyond which one cannot go. That edge follows logically from a mythical beginning called the Big Bang. But the concept of an edge requires there to be an outside which defies the meaning of universe, which is everything that exists. The trouble is, the Big Bang is only required by the universal law of gravity to primordially blow everything apart. Why that initial state didn't constitute a black hole is not explained. The Big Bang universe is unstable because of the tendency for everything to fall back in again. I use the words law of gravity because that law is merely an equation, while gravity itself is not understood. The necessity to introduce imaginary dark matter and dark energy to save appearances is evidence of this. Mathematicians need to assume that the law is universal and that gravity always behaves as we experience it here on Earth. Otherwise, they're out of business. Clearly, this is a belief driven by necessity. It's not science. So it's no surprise that the Big Bang creation myth was born as a kind of restatement of the creation story of Western cultures by Georges Lemaitre, a Belgian Roman Catholic priest and astronomer. It seems we need a cosmology that addresses our existential fears and makes us feel safe. But safe from what? That is the question never asked by scientists today. As the Australian philosopher David Stove wrote in his book, Anything Goes, Newtonian physics is a guarantee against the occurrence of just about anything disagreeable. This brings me to human nature. The last revolution in science occurred in the time of the upheaval and chaos of the First World War. You may notice I didn't say scientific revolution, since there was very little about it that was scientific. The Copenhagen interpretation of quantum theory is probabilistic. It disconnects cause and effect, disregarding a fundamental principle of physics. And Einstein's relativity removes the absolute frame of reference essential for measurement in physics. For example, if two clocks are moving relative to one another with velocity v, there is no way of special relativity theory telling which clock is ticking slower than the other, because all you have is a single piece of information, v, that is symmetrical for the two clocks. So much for the twin paradox. It ain't physics. So it's no surprise that these two theories that are supposed to be the pillars of modern cosmology, one at the subatomic level and the other at the cosmological scale, are incompatible. It's astonishing that science can be as impervious to self-correction in this modern era as it was when the Earth was thought the centre of the universe. Newton was right. Celestial bodies know each other's positions instantly, in defiance of Einstein's speed of light prohibition. Quantum spooky action at a distance and entanglement show a similar instantaneous resonant connection between separated matter.
Lenticular clouds. Mount Shasta. Reading-ish. Reading or not. Very cool. Beep, 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 beep.
There is a universal time. What physical clocks do depends on where they are and how they are moving with respect to other bodies in the universe. But it seems we need another revolution before scientists will give up their computerized virtual reality and return to physics.
For continuous updates on space news from... Welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, UFO. A new scientific paper suggests that lightning on Earth may be vastly more powerful than conventional science has ever suggested. Investigators sought to answer how much energy is in a terrestrial bolt of lightning through the study of fulgurites, which are hollow glass tubes that form when lightning strikes soil, silica, sand, or rock. To their surprise, they found that the lightning that formed some of the fulgurites had far more energy than is expected of earthly lightning. In his web article, "There's way more energy in a bolt of lightning than we thought," Matthew Pasek, associate professor of geosciences at the University of South Florida, states of the findings. When we looked at these fulgurites in depth, something odd came out of the data. Our energy measurements followed something called a log normal trend, rather than following the bell curve we often see in the distribution of natural phenomena. The large lightning strikes were much larger than the average, while the smaller strikes were not so much smaller than the average. Strikes that were twice the average were as frequent as those that were half the average. Pasek continues, based on our calculations, how close does Hollywood come with estimates likened Back to the Future of 1.21 gigawatts of power in lightning? Power is energy per time, and our measurements of fulgurites suggest that megajoules of energy make rock in thousands to millions of seconds. So a gigawatt is actually on the low side. Lightning power may be 1,000 times that, reaching into the terawatts, though the average is probably tens of gigawatts. The research was conducted in Florida, which receives more lightning than any other state in the U.S. However, any lightning occurring on Earth today may be only trivial in comparison to past extraordinary electrical events that are no longer occurring in our solar system today. The position of the chief principals of the Thunderbolts project is that in the relatively recent past, perhaps only several thousand years ago, in a period of chaos in the inner solar system, violent electrical discharges between planetary bodies dramatically altered the surfaces of several planets and moons, including the Earth. As repeatedly outlined on this series, experiments with electrical discharges have successfully reproduced countless familiar geological features. Intriguingly, this latest research is not the first recent finding to suggest that lightning's power is far greater than consensus science has ever suspected. The 2014 National Geographic article, "Lightning Can Shape a Mountain," outlines the research of geomorphologists into the effects of lightning on the Drakensberg Mountains of southern Africa. The research found that, quote, lightning, rather than ice or heat, is the main force shattering rocks on Drakensberg summits. The lightning is said to have destroyed basalt rock face and scattered as much as 10 tons of debris dozens of feet. The electrical discharges have formed pits up to 3 feet deep and have reportedly moved boulders the size of a small truck. Evidence for shockingly powerful lightning has been found on other planets as well. Earlier this year, scientists expressed their amazement over the completely unexpected discovery of the mineral tridymite in a Martian crater. Tridymite only forms at super hot temperatures and is normally associated with volcanic activity. But Mars is not known to have the dynamic subsurface plates that are thought necessary to create volcanic activity. NASA planetary scientist Richard Morris said of the discovery, "It was the last mineral we expected to see. If this stands the test of time, it has a lot of implications for how Mars evolved. We may have to rethink a few things." The discovery is so problematic that investigators said that they're now trying to discover ways that tridymite can form at much less than super hot temperatures.
Ad hoc.
But could the Martian mineral have been formed by extremely powerful electrical discharges? As noted in a previous space news, tritomite has been reported as a product of lightning on a roofing slate in the book, The Data of Geochemistry. If the electrical catastrophes that we have proposed did in fact occur, then high-energy electrical discharges would have removed enormous materials from Mars and other planets and moons, producing many, if not all, of the observed comets, asteroids, and meteoroids in our solar system. In fact, many recent scientific discoveries provide clues to these past events, though institutionalized science has yet to connect the pieces of the puzzle. For decades, scientists have puzzled over the origins of glassy beads found in stony meteorites, called chondrules. The theory of meteorite origins in a primordial dust cloud did not allow for the extreme heating and sudden cooling required for the chondrules' formation. However, in his 1988 scientific paper, Formation of Chondritic Meteorites and the Solar System, physicist Wal Thornhill proposed that intense electrical discharges were the process that formed the chondrules. Today, the scientific mainstream has taken steps toward the same conclusion. In 2013, a scientific study suggested that the chondrules were created by lightning within a theoretical protoplanetary disk. A Space.com report on the study stated, rocks melted in the early solar system after electrical currents spiked through the cloud of dust circling around the young sun. Some have suggested a similar process for comets, after the astonishing discovery of complex crystalline structures in dust particles from the comet Wild 2 in NASA's 2004 Stardust mission. The mission's principal investigator, Donald Brownlee, said of the discovery, in the coldest part of the solar system, we have found samples that formed at extremely hot temperatures.
Doesn't have to be lightning.
When these minerals formed, they were either red hot or white hot grains. And yet they were collected in a comet, the Siberia of the solar system. A few have suggested that a, quote, transient heating event, such as shocks, or indeed lightning in the outer regions of the protoplanetary disk, may have created the anomalous minerals in the Wild 2 dust samples.
You can literally plug into trees and potatoes and all kinds of living stuff and draw energy off of them.
How little scientists today really understand about lightning.
It's even crazier
than you think. The study of lightning
think.
illuminates the electrical connectedness between the Earth and the Sun. And it may also provide a window to past events that forever changed our world.
The government stops
and
you.
Remain a puzzle yet to be resolved.
They'll come in and take your kids away and tell you, oh, you don't have electricity. You can't be independent. You have to buy electricity from us. At least a certain percentage. If you're doing other things. It's weird. Try to run on your own generators and stuff that they go after you. People have to
Welcome
do it
to Space
secret,
News from the
basically,
Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info.
Intruding and being invasive.
The Electric Universe theory has laid the foundations for an entirely new understanding of planetary geology. For decades, experimentalists using electrical discharges have reproduced many familiar geological features, including types of crater forms that have long proved puzzling to standard geology. These experiments may provide clues to past events that the scientific mainstream has never entertained. High-energy electrical discharges at an interplanetary scale. Is it possible to integrate these new possibilities into a geology that also includes standard geological processes? In this episode, our guest Barry Setterfield, the astronomer at the New Hope Observatory in Grants Pass, Oregon, outlines a number of guidelines for assessing whether craters on planets, moons, and other bodies were created by impacts or by electrical discharge machining.
Okay, well, I was teaching astronomy at the time, and the issue of the origin of craters on astronomical objects of all sizes had come up, and we needed to resolve this issue with the students. For example, in the days before the Apollo moon landings, and even for some time after, there's a strong body of opinion which held that all such craters were the result of volcanism, and that idea died slowly. It was replaced by the idea that all craters are the result of impact. But then the results of electrical experiments became available, which solved problems that neither impact nor volcanism could. And I needed to do some cratering experiments to distinguish between the various types of craters and then present these results to my students. Volcanism usually has craters at the tops of mountains. Unlike the moon and planets, the crater bottoms there go below the level of the surrounding plains. The volcanic craters that look like those on the moon are called calderas, but the calderas are only circular and at ground level if the collapse to a depression follows the first major volcanic outburst, and that's rather rare. The basic rule of thumb is that the rim material of lunar craters will approximately fill the pit. This is not usually the case of volcanic calderas, which have a different profile.
Brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project. In September of 2015, for the first time ever, an image was captured of an elusive electrical phenomenon above the Earth. An astronaut aboard the International Space Station imaged a kind of electrical discharge in the upper atmosphere, known as a blue jet. It wasn't until the mid-1990s that scientists were able to verify this kind of intense electrical activity above thunderclouds, reaching towards space, though some airline pilots had claimed to witness the phenomena for decades prior. Scientists today acknowledge they don't fully understand blue jets, or another form of above-clouds lightning, called red sprites. Yet surprisingly, as far back as the 1920s, a Scottish physicist named C.J.R. Wilson predicted the existence of brief flashes of light above large thunderstorms. A fundamental question that must be asked is, do scientists today really understand lightning? Much of what we observe in nature and recent scientific research suggests that the answer is no. In 2001, a physicist named Professor Edgar Bering at the University of Houston flew a high-altitude balloon above a thunderstorm. He made the unexpected discovery that when lightning strikes occur above and below the clouds, the electrical charge was already present and did not take time to build up between lightning strikes. This contradicts the standard notion that lightning is a generator of the clear air electric field, measured at about 100 volts per meter between the Earth and a clear sky. Lightning's generation of power requires water droplets to separate charge in clouds, a process that remains mysterious and unverified. The electric universe, however, sees lightning and the cloud activity as a load that is being driven by electricity from space. And it is the electrical circuitry between the sun and the Earth that drives all lightning. Recent scientific studies have confirmed the role of the electromagnetic Earth-Sun connection in lightning. In 2014, scientists in the UK discovered a dramatic increase in lightning strikes for up to 40 days after a major solar storm. The researchers admit they don't understand the cause of the increased lightning, suggesting that the collision of protons with gas particles in the atmosphere, quote, somehow alters the electrical properties in the air. The role of electric currents from the sun in creating lightning may be even more clearly evidenced on other planets. For instance, on the planet Venus, no water clouds are present, but rather, the atmosphere is composed of what has been characterized as a, quote, fog. Yet when the Soviet Union's Venera spacecraft touched down on the planet in the early 1960s, it found constant lightning activity, from tens of kilometers down to a couple of kilometers altitude, with discharges occurring as frequently as 25 per second. In contrast, the highest recorded rate on Earth is 1.4 per second. In the electric universe, Venus is a charged body immersed in an electrical circuit. This means that Venus is the focus of a cometary-style discharge to the solar electrical environment, a fact evidenced by Venus's enormous filamentary magnetotail. A new understanding of lightning on Earth and other planets may help to enable a radical reassessment of mysterious atmospheric phenomena on many planets and moons. A recently imaged blue jet bears a resemblance to some of the so-called volcanic plumes on the Jovian moon Io, while planetary scientists believe that tidal heating creates cryovolcanoes which generate the plumes. Recent studies have shown that these models have failed to predict the locations of the plumes. Similar plumes are also seen on the Saturnian moon Enceladus. And in 2015, scientists were stunned when giant plumes were imaged jetting hundreds of kilometers above the surface of Mars. The electrical connection between a planet and the sun has enormous implications for the safety and efficacy of all future space missions. In the 1990s, the Thunderbolts project's chief science advisor, physicist Wal Thornhill, offered a prediction and warning about a space tether experiment in which a satellite was flown at the end of a long wire held radially from the Earth. Thornhill warned that by trailing a wire radially, scientists would achieve voltages that could prove destructive. The prediction appeared to be confirmed when the tether separated at the shuttle, and the satellite at the end of the tether was lost. Thornhill also warns against plans to build a so-called space elevator, which would enable astronauts to travel up and down a kind of elevator cable between the Earth and space. Such an elevator is, in Thornhill's opinion, an impossible dream, since it could only act as the ultimate lightning. It is telling that lightning, nature's most dramatic electrical display on Earth, may be providing scientists with the most obvious clues to the electrical nature of the sun, the Earth-Sun relationship, and of the universe as a whole. For continuous updates on space news from the electric universe, welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info. In a recent 5-part video compilation, Dr. Franklin Anariba, a specialist in electrochemistry, offered his extensive analysis of several papers from the Rosetta mission to Comet 67P. Among the findings Dr. Anariba discussed was the discovery of electric fields and fast-moving electrons close to the comet nucleus, and evidence that electrochemical processes may be responsible for the production of water molecules in the comet's coma. In January, Science News headlines stated that ESA scientists have observed so-called exposed water ice on the comet's surface.
However, it is the case with these other two methods. Now, Venus is covered with 1,600 volcanoes, mainly the shield type of volcano, which is similar to those in Hawaii, but they're more broad and flat. Radar surveys also show that Venus has about 1,000 craters, similar to the Moon and Mercury and Mars. And these have a different character, and so they're formed by different processes. In addition, the proliferation of craters on very small asteroids and dwarf planets rules out volcanism as being the origin for those craters. You can't have volcanic hot magma centered to such a small body. It doesn't work. So there are features of both impact-based and electrically based crater formation that correspond with what we see on objects in our solar system. Both methods of crater formation describe some, but not all of the features that we observe. From the experimental analyses that I have done, it seems that we have a mix of both electrical and impact-based craters. And these experiments seem to allow us to determine whether or not a particular crater may have formed by impact or by electrical discharge machining, EDM. Craters can be formed by the impact of some solid body, such as an asteroid or a meteorite. And as that body hits a planetary surface, its velocity can range up to 45 miles per second, which is pretty fast. This can be simulated in a lab experimentally. Since real impacts will smash any material from soft pumice to alloy steel, the material that we use in the lab should have no tensile strength. Now, there is such material, and it's dust. And for practical reasons, we use cement dust. It comes in uniform quality. So we have a layer of cement dust about 6 inches thick in a large box or a pan. And the meteorite is then a spoonful of slightly compressed cement dust